What's the cringiest thing you've seen a bride and groom do for their wedding? When I was in high school, one of my hockey teammates had a kid with his girlfriend when they were juniors. They decided to get married, and the wedding was officiated by my teammate's dad, who also happened to be our head coach. The entire wedding was the bride and groom's direct family and the hockey team at a Golden Corral. Then the reception was at the same Golden Corral. Then we had a hockey game that night. The other team we played that night somehow found out about it and hounded the guy the whole time. They were a bunch of dicks now about 7 years later that have a second kid. Dad is an officer in the Air Force. Both of his kids play hockey and he coaches and refs, and him and his wife look very happy. So I'm glad it all worked out for them. Edit. For all of you asking about the game, I honestly don't remember if we won. Hockey season's a long one with a lot of games, and it was 7 to 8 years ago. And as a side note, I really did not mean for this to be a rip on the couple. They're amazing together and doing an awesome job raising their kids in a loving household where they want for nothing. They haven't had the easiest lives, but they're doing the best they can and absolutely killing it. I haven't spoken to him in a while, but I've seen his dad, our old coach, at alumni games, and they're such an awesome family. They're the perfect example of the fact that you don't need a giant, expensive, fancy-ass wedding to be happy. As long as you have each other, family, and friends, it's a joyous occasion that should be celebrated. The groomsmen prepared a skit in which they lost the groom at the reception and proceeded with over-the-top hands on hips. Hey guys, aren't we forgetting something? Well, where can he possibly be? Acting like some high school musical. None of the guests were prepared and silently fussed around with their drinks and silverware. When the whole thing ended, they anticipated like a standing ovation, but it went over the heads of everyone. A lone voice muttered that was kinda weird as they made their exit quietly. Edit. I guess this blew up to the point I should try to remember some of the skit. It was some of the corniest shit I saw. Not sure if some of them were inside jokes to the groomsmen crew. They all entered into the main area together minus the groom. One guy had the fat-ass cartoony voice. Hey, and we missing something? It can't be me, because I'm always prepared. Winks and pause for laughs. What about your boaty? Oh no. Produces tie, puts it on, waits for audience reaction. No wait. It's the groom. Where can he possibly be? This went on for a bit. I don't remember it all, because I was on my phone not really doing anything but to avoid eye contact every time they said a line and desperately scanned across the audience. In the end, the groom came out through the door when he was cued. I don't think he knew about the skit. Thank God he wasn't there to see it unfold. As for the crowd, who isn't gonna clap and whistle when the newlyweds show up at a wedding, so it was all good. Friend of friends. Young, uber Christian small town naive girl. Meets married, much older man with 2 kids. Falls in love. He does eventually leave his wife. Doesn't want any custody. Wedding was her hometown church. His vows were over the top about how he has never felt love before. She is the only woman he ever wanted to marry. He's been so lonely his whole life, etc. He's literally sobbing through it all. Her turn to say her vows and she's standing there saying nothing for at least 3 beats. Then she is handed a microphone and the piano starts playing. She's made up her own song, which are her vows. After the ceremony, we adjourn to the church basement for the alcohol-free reception. I'm somehow roped into serving the groom's cake. It's 2 nice cacao cakes made with an edible photo draped over the cake shapes and impossible to cut through without mangling the cake, so I have to peel it off. My friend is cutting the bride's cake and it's a full inch or more of fondant on top of plain cake. No frosting. The buffet was potluck from her family. Food you'd expect at a kid's party. Pink punch was the only thing to drink. No dancing because of her religion. Then they left for their honeymoon at the town's only hotel, which was like a Motel 6 level dump in a 2-horse-drawn carriage. Bride entered to Bravo Hit soundtrack blasting on boombox. Civil service that lasted a few minutes starting at around 1 PM. She leaves to same blasting Bravo Hit soundtrack. The mother announces that the reception starts at 5:30 PM. There is no food and no bar, but trays of dessert bars will be served. We are also told the venue is locked until then, so there is no place to wait. My girlfriend and I leave with a crowd of people to across the street to an Irish pub for drinks. A bit of a party breaks out there. We all get told to knock it off and come wait back at the venue in the hall. So we sit in the hall on the carpet for a few hours without drinks, or then a bride and groom arrive and enter the venue to an honor guard of floor hockey players wearing hockey jerseys and holding sticks above their heads like swords at a royal wedding. More brotherhood music, of course. Point place emptied out pretty quick as people either left to go back to the pub or to the fast food place a bit further away. Our dinner was lemon squares and a can of Coke from a vending machine in the lobby. Point funny stuff. Point edit. I should mention that I got guilt tripped into staying after the event to help clean up as I lived nearby and didn't have to work that day. It was the perfect ending. Friend's wedding. The bride wanted to sing him a song, so she did a kind of karaoke thing. Point there's bad singing, and then there's whatever the hell this was. It was so awkward. Point also, Jude asked a professional photographer friend of ours to photograph the wedding about a year before. Got a super non-committal answer, never followed up, and was shocked that the photographer didn't show up after he specifically declined the invitation because he was going to be in another country. Had the entire set of groomsmen rent ridiculously expensive tuxedos. Which, fine. Cool. Happy to be here. He's having his tux custom tailored. Asks for something ridiculous and gaudy, but when quoted the price says he can't swing that and insists they do it for about 1/4 the price. They do their best to meet specifications within the given price range, but it's bad. Really bad. So, the groomsmen look amazing, and he looks like a clown that didn't put on his makeup. Point has another friend make a custom batch of mead for the toast, but rents a hall that doesn't allow outside alcohol, so it can't be used for the toast during the reception. Point it was probably the cringiest thing I've ever seen. Not just the cringiest wedding, or even cringiest thing at a wedding. Probably my cousin's wedding. The food was really bad. And I mean really bad. Things that were supposed to be warm/hot were ice cold and completely undercooked. There was music, but nobody was allowed to dance because we don't want people to dance on our wedding. There was also no alcohol, not a single drop. But the worst thing was the seating arrangement. They didn't plan on families/friends sitting together. I don't know what they were thinking. I was sitting on a table with complete strangers. They even separated our grandparents from each other. Point after an hour my grandmother stood up, walked over to my grandfather, and both declared that they are leaving now to the restaurant down the road, having something good to eat and a beer. I joined them as well as my parents. It didn't took long that people noticed that our seats were empty. Really easy to figure out, since nobody was allowed to dance or walk around in general. We got a call from one of my uncles where we are at. After we explained why we left, he said, "You are right. This is bullshit," and we ended up with 20 guests from the wedding in that small restaurant, having a fun evening. Point I still don't know why they even bothered celebrating their wedding. They also never invited us again. That's actually a good thing, because now I don't need to find an excuse why I can't join their future parties. I'm in the wedding industry. I've been to over 3,000 weddings. The singing your vows thing is never ever going to work out like you think it will. Never sing your vows. Never attempt to sing any part of your wedding. It will not go as you visualized it. Point a wedding day is not a good time for surprises. Don't surprise your bride with an unexpected part of the ceremony. Don't surprise your mom by the wedding itself. True story. The bride told her mom she was going to an engagement dinner. The only exception to this rule is if you give the bride a surprise addition to her ring, grandma's diamond, a ring made from her parents' rings, etc. Jokes about such later are never funny. They make people uncomfortable, and it makes you look like an adolescent. There will always be crickets after you make the joke. Point. If you are going to be late, communicate that to everyone somehow. Have your or your parents, or someone tell everyone you will be late. The staff needs to know, especially. Point if you forget the rings, don't stress it. It's a funny story. If you forget your vows, wing it as best you can. Just don't sing. Ask the officiant for help for last minute vows. Finally, don't get drunk and be an ass. You don't want to be that guy. Plus, if you are drunk, you won't be able to have sex later. Crickets. So this wedding took place in an Episcopal church. Priest had all his finery on and the church itself was decorated very nicely. The bride and groom had asked everyone to wear casual clothes. We all took that to mean semi-formal. Nope. They and their kids all came out wearing overalls and white t-shirts. Stood next to the priest in his formal robes. The other cringy part was when the groom, during the ceremony, started talking about the Bible verse "Let the little children come to me," and insisting it implied, "And listen to what they're telling you." Pretty sure they were divorced in 2 years. Edit. I should explain the little children comment a bit more. It was part of a 20-minute speech explaining how the bride and groom got together. There were plenty of parts in the story where the groom was like, I wasn't sure she was right for me, but his son was pressing him because he wanted a mom. Sad story actually. Biological mom died when the kid was 4 and this was 8 years later. So it was this long and focused story that boiled down to, I'm marrying this woman so my kid can have a mom. Not a good sign when that's your main reason to get married. I focused on the little children quote because getting advice from children is absolutely not what that quote is about. I knew it, probably half the attendees knew it, and the priest definitely knew it. That whole story would have been fine to tell during the reception, but I have no idea why he decided to tell it during the actual wedding. I'm sitting here reading along happily and completely forgetting I can actually contribute. I have burned this from the far reaches of my memory. It was that bad. But here we go. Apologies for length. It was a weird long night. My wedding, if one may call it that, was an extremely small and quick affair under an overpass by a fetid body of water, consisting of my over-emotional and violently excited mother, my ex-husband in his dress uniform, and me in a leather jacket trying to reason with the two of them that this is all rather sudden, and we are under an overpass, for God's sake. Disclaimer, the ex was the mastermind behind all this. We'd been together some years, occasionally discussed marriage. I wasn't in a rush. Apparently he was. Youth. He'd flown my mother down as a surprise, hired a local non-denominational minister, picked under the overpass for the charming view of the open water beside it. Nothing good or green lived in that water. It smelled and was stagnant. I remember staring wearily out at it while I listened to cars passing overhead. It was very windy. Did I mention it was night? This was less a joyous union and more the beginning of a Law and Order episode. My mother is doing a foxtrot in her joy over our young love. Anyways, I'm an idiot. I go with it. It's bizarre, but I've a strong tolerance for the bizarre, and I feel bad money was spent, and mother was flown and whatnot. In retrospect, I should have cast myself into the water before me and cried out for Cthulhu to take me into his sweet embrace, but hindsight is always 20/20. I digress. Here comes the minister. He's late. I can see he is also wondering why the fuck we are all under an overpass in the dark. He comes closer. I get a good glimpse of his face. He is cross-eyed. Now, cross-eyed happens, and I mean no disrespect to the cross-eyed. But merciful Christ. I'm under an overpass, next to a swamp, mother dancing, ex oblivious to why I seem disturbed. It is night, trucks downshift above me, and now here is the minister looking at all of us at once with ease, and if I laugh, I'm never going to stop. I will shame this poor man, my idiot ex, my faking mother. Save me, Jesus. Don't let me laugh. Dead puppies, dead puppies, dead puppies. I keep it together. I do not laugh. And then the minister begins to speak. He is addressing my ex whilst simultaneously looking at both me and the water. He wants his money up front. That's what the Craigslist had specified. I proceed to inhale my own face to keep from dying. My mother, God love her, cheerfully volunteers a 20 from her wallet. My ex is muttering and paying the minister. In the back of my mind, I wonder if this man is legally able to marry us. Sadly, he was. Minister paid. The ceremony begins. It's quickly apparent he doesn't know my name, despite introducing myself, while trying to not make eye contact. He calls me Georgie. My name is Jenny. I correct him politely. He waves his hand in the air, as if swatting off flies. I'm Georgie for the rest of the event, fuck it. Why not? My ex takes my hand. My mother starts noisily weeping. The wind really kicks up, while the cars rattle overhead. I'm straining to hear the minister over the din. He swiftly spits out the "we are gathered" and so forth, with the harried air of man performing a sheet wedding ceremony under an overpass at night, who just wants to go the fuck back to whatever Craigslist ministers do when not on duty. It is time for my vows. I actually laugh briefly at this point, but by now it's panic. What the actual fuck is happening here? Have I lost my mind? I'm getting married under a faking overpass with a officiant who can't be bothered to learn my name. It's at this moment both myself and the minister forget how the vows actually go. I remember first. I chant with this ring. The minister looks in 2 directions at once and chants in reply with this ring. All of this is confusing. I shove the ring on my ex's hand and blurt out the rest furiously. At least what I know from watching wedding movies. I'm not about to do a call and response with the minister who doesn't know my name. It's done. We are permitted to kiss. The world's briefest kiss occurs. My mother is good enough to take pictures. In the dark with the flash on, the minister looks absolute nightmare fuel. The flash is what does me in. It breaks me from whatever stupor I've been in for the last half hour. I begin to laugh. This is not the gentle sweet laughter of a new bride swept up in the rapture of love. This is the deranged howling of a mad woman bereft of her medication. This is senseless, evil cackling in the night. It fills the space under the overpass. It drowns out the cars and the wind. It does not stop. I try, I really do, to gather myself. It doesn't work. I'm too far gone. My mother doesn't look so excited anymore. And the minister pulls his eyes together long enough to give my ex a look of deep and heartfelt pity. We head to the minister's car and sign the paperwork on its hood. I'm still laughing. Nobody is saying anything. It is uncomfortable. I look and feel like a lunatic. I'm laughing out of context. This is already much longer than I'd anticipated it being, and this is probably going to get buried anyways, so I'm going to wrap it up. Minister gets in his car and leaves. I laugh. We climb into our own car and head to a chain restaurant. I laugh. We eat. I laugh. We end up at home. I laugh. Mother goes to bed. I laugh. Ex tries to get frisky. I laugh. You get the picture. Found out later he had a drinking problem and liked to pour up other women whilst drunk. He doesn't see an issue with it. Divorce ensues. Takes a while, but eventually I laugh at that too. Life is weird, but funny. Large, matching back tattoos of the Monster Energy drink logo. Edit. Okay, that blew up a little. Some background. Obligatory. My brother was actually the witness, but still one of the funniest / cringiest stories ever. My bro managed a gas station about 10 years ago and hired the soon to be bride. A little while into her employment she requested off for her wedding. The date was still a couple months out, so no big deal. About a week before her request off she came into work and the exchange goes like this. Bride, wanna see my new tattoo, bro? Sure. She lifts the back of her shirt to reveal a huge green M covering the whole upper half of her back. Bro, holy shit. Wow. Bride, awesome. How? We both got the same tat, bro. Really, bride? I know what you're thinking. Copyright, right? But what are they gonna do? It's already on my body. It's already on my body. Haha, bro. Right. That is what I was thinking. He did get to see pictures. I'm working on getting a hold of those. It was a camouflage themed wedding. She had an open back camo gown with camo heels, complete with camo veil. I really wish it was ghillie suit headgear. The groom had camo pants with camo boots and a camo bootie. He was, indeed, shirtless. He did wear a camo ball cap, though. I imagine them walking down the aisle, backs glistening in the sun with Vaseline over a huge monster logo. Just the perfect day. They have been, were happily married for 7 months. Edit. Some formatting. I suck at Reddit. This happened right before our wedding. We were set to have my now husband's family friend that's a pastor be our officiant. I'm not religious whatsoever, but open to anything. My husband's late mother was a Sunday school teacher, and so his family is pretty religious anyway. We went to the pastor's house to go over our wedding plans and everything, and he asked me if I was going to center my marriage around God. The answer was no. It got awkward real fast. It became a back and forth as to why I won't accept Jesus and how awful that is. He didn't like it either. We were getting married at a country club. He then refused to do the wedding. We scrambled and found our town's mayor to marry us. I made my own ceremony and wrote the whole thing from scratch. Then the day of the wedding the mayor mentioned her recent back surgery and just wanted to get this over with. She called my husband Eric multiple times. His name is Evan, and she was high on painkillers, so she went off script there for a bit. Have you ever watched I Now Pronounce You Chuck and Larry? Yeah, she did the whole marriage is a circle script. It took everything we had not to die laughing point, and that pastor, he showed up and watched the whole thing go down. We got a picture with him at our wedding. Him and his wife cropped us out of it, and he made it his profile picture. My aunt and uncle had decided to dedicate their wedding to the bride's kids. Everything was Little Mermaid, and they had a huge Little Mermaid bouncy house right in the middle of everything. Their wedding was on a severely crowded beach at 3 in the afternoon. The groom decided it would be a good idea to ride a paddleboard into the reception, and it would be an awesome idea, except everyone could see him get on the board and then go out to the ocean, then turn right around and come back. The couple also decided to get incredibly high and couldn't even remember each other's names, let alone this. Oh, and one last thing. The groom's vows were literally "I love you more than bacon." That's it. That's the only thing she said. Point at it. Since some of you wanted a couple more stories, I will tell them. During the ceremony, as I have mentioned before, it was a very crowded beach. There were little kids and dogs everywhere. A couple of dogs got loose and no one really seemed to care, but those dogs ended up going behind them, and they started going at it. No one did anything to shoo away the pups having a good time, because obviously no one wanted to ruin the ceremony, but the only thing anyone could focus on were the dogs just going at it as the preacher was talking about love and long lasting. The couple wanted to do the cake thing, where you smash it in each other's face, and honestly it's a fun and cute idea, but they took it a little too far. The bride doesn't even pick up the cake, she grabs her husband's head and just smashes it down. All anyone had for desserts, that my poor great grandma spent days making. Point. That is all I remember for now, but if there is any that I do remember, I will definitely post them. Thank you everyone for the upvotes. That's my time to shine. So, my cousin was about to get married in a Protestant church that his bride used to go. Now, keep in mind my cousin doesn't have any religion, so he only married in the church because his fiancée really insisted. Point. So we are all gathered in the church as the minister started. His first words were "Good night, open your Bibles in Apocalypse." He starts reading the part that says all the kinds of people that goes to hell, turns to my cousin and says, "I know you fornicated with her, she told me. And you are getting married here because I told her that's the only way for her to get forgiveness." Point. And, as if that wasn't enough, the minister starts pointing out everybody in the faking church who was fornicating. He kept saying that they were going to hell, that their lives were cursed and all kinds of shit like this. After 1 hour and a half of this, he, without asking for vows or even saying the famous "You may now kiss the bride," just said, "We are over here. Proceed to the party, and may God bless you all." My cousin was fuming, mad as fuck. When we got to the party, he starts drinking beer like an absolute madman, goes to the DJ and asks him to play the devil songs as the minister would say, and danced the faking night away. Point. His bride, who was on board with everything that the minister did, gets so faking upset she started crying in the party as the minister goes home. I'm not married, and I really don't intend to be, but I don't think that's a good start for a couple. Attended a wedding of a family friend who I grew up with. Point. Everything was planned with no passion, and every wedding event or game or tradition was just put into the wedding just because every wedding has that point. So we had a rather heartless photo shoot with the couple. I was her makeup artist simultaneously, because I do makeup for a living, a boring bouquet toss, and at one point the couple, or rather the bridezilla, announced that her maid of honor, the groom's sister, would hold a speech, which felt really boring. Then she announced that the best man, the groom's best friend, would hold a speech as well, to which the best man just looked speechless because he hadn't prepared a speech, and it wasn't communicated to him that he would have to. Again, everything felt like it was only happening because at every wedding that needs to happen. Then out of nowhere, the maid of honor, who had planned the whole wedding, whips out a faking speech on a piece of paper that she herself had written for him in case he hadn't prepared a speech himself. In this speech it was written that the groom can be so lucky/happy that he has the bride in his life, because back in the day he didn't used to shower that frequent, and now she is having an eye on that again. Supposedly written by his own sister. When I think about it now, I have the feeling the bride wrote it. Everyone just looked so faking uncomfortable after this speech. It was so bad. This wedding may have been planned like the perfect one, but it just felt like they put every wedding activity into it just so they could experience it. I went to the wedding for a college friend and ended up experiencing the worst wedding / best wedding story I could fear / hope for. Let's start with the location. For some unknown reason, they had decided to hold the ceremony at the funeral chapel in a local cemetery. The setting could be charitably described as baroque. It felt more like they were being married in a tomb. Wrought iron floor candelabras lined the walls, and the altar featured a graphic relief carving of the crucifixion. What little natural light there was filtered in through small, stained glass windows high on the walls, similarly ordained with scenes of death. I was not entirely sure that we wouldn't be sacrificed to the old gods and knew as part of the ceremony. The bride had a penchant for the macabre and was somewhat unpredictable. The ceremony itself had cringe-worthy element. At one point, the bride turned to the audience and sang a rendition of Tonight from West Side Story. She considers herself a talented singer. Her ability does not match her confidence. Later, the maid of honor read a poem, written by the bride, about how lucky the groom was to have her. Her poetry was on par with her singing. I spent the 45 minutes of the ceremony squeezing my wife's hand in mental agony. The festivities continued at the reception. The bridal party elected to do their photos between the ceremony and reception. While typically less favorable than doing the photos before the ceremony, possibly a topic of contention, fight me, doing so is generally acceptable, as long as arrangements are made for the guests not involved. In this case, there were no such arrangements. We sat in an empty room, with no music, food, or beverages for an hour and a half, waiting for things to start. In the meantime, we admired the decor. The reception theme was a midnight in Paris, though they inadvertently arrived at Shitty Prom. The tables were adorned with stars made from sticks poked into styrofoam balls, spray painted gold, and covered in glitter. The centerpiece was a large foam moon with a starry sky backdrop, against which guests could stage awkward prom photo shoots. The entire affair had a solid nailed it vibe. Things did not significantly improve once the bridal party arrived. The family was conservative Christian, so there was no alcohol. In retrospect, I'm glad I wasn't able to dull the memory of this illustrious event. Music was provided by the bride's cousin, whose duties were to press play on a Windows Media Player playlist, a task that took far more effort than I would have expected. The emotional climax of the reception was when the bride's father serenaded her with an old country western standard. I could immediately see where she had gotten her musical ability. It was the most cringe-worthy 5 hours of my life. I would not trade the memory for anything. My sister-in-law's wedding. There were 2 weddings at the same venue and Sil had a list of banned songs for her reception. The other wedding started playing one of them. It was across the building, so you could hear it very faintly, and Sil went bounding off towards the other wedding to give them shit for playing a song she didn't like. Mother of the bride also wore a white gold gown and had her old lady cleavage proudly displayed so as to upstage her beach on wheels daughter. Ex's friend's wedding. Very young religious couple, 19 and 20, getting married so they can fuck. At their religious wedding the pastor made a whole speech about women not being equal to men and being created as an inferior creature to serve men. Bride seemed thrilled with this. Reception was open-faced room temperature egg salad sandwiches, provided by the ladies of the church. Acquaintance's wedding. Groom's sister-in-law sang a song at the reception. It might have been nice but no one knew it was going to happen. The song was in German, no one understood it, and the singer was terrible. Cousin's wedding. Another very young couple, 20 and 21, but not religious. Groom cooked meals for reception and had them reheated the day if. They weren't too terrible, but definitely tasted reheated. Their young friends also got super wasted, and a small child was kicked in the face at full force by one of the groomsmen. My wedding. Husband is painfully shy and didn't want dancing lessons, so we came up with a simple routine together the night before the ceremony. During the dance he accidentally went right when he was meant to go left, and I stepped on the edge of my dress at the same time, which led to me slipping and twisting my ankle. We still had a good time, but if you have the opportunity to get dance lessons and practice, do it. Okay, I work at a wedding place, so I have some good ones, but here is the best one. First of all, this is a classy wedding place. It's not cheap. In other words, when you show up with cheap decorations they look twice as cheap. Enter the purple couple. These people had purple bridesmaids dresses, sure, fine. But he was wearing a purple suit with purple shoes. She brought purple. I'm talking like crayon box purple here, not wedding purple. Decorations including her own tablecloths, fake purple flowers, purple vases, purple lights, purple desserts, purple drinks. The worst was you guessed it, purple glitter, which she proceeded to throw everywhere in our outdoor mountain venue. Animal lives, who cares, right? Finally came the shoe dance. Now I don't know about you guys, but I didn't have any desire to spend any part of our wedding touching my husband's dancing shoes. But apparently the shoe dance goes as such. Bride and groom each take off one shoe and pass it to their partner. They then sit back to back in chairs. The DJ asks questions such as who is more likely to do such and such, and if you think your partner would do that, you hold their stinky shoe up in the air. To this day I will never forget cleaning up the purple glitter. Thanks for the memories, edit. Apparently I've been using Aka wrong my whole life. English is not my force, so please excuse me in advance. I was one of the best man at a friend's wedding. It was a cringe fest party. Even before the wedding itself, we, 6 friends of the groom, got there in advance and had to prepare the room for the wedding. I'm not joking, even with a few wildflowers picked on the side for the centerpiece. It looked fairly okay, but I guess you get what kind of people they are. At one point, the guy who officiated the wedding asked the whole room if anyone would like to say a few words for the newlyweds. No one got up. Maybe after a big 1 minute of silence, someone stood up and said this: I don't really know the groom, but he seems like a nice guy. This was the girlfriend of the wife's father. The groom was dressed way too big for his frame and wore a black label cap, American beer brand. The cake was black and white with a big skull on it. The first dance was interrupted by the fill, just to say that he was leaving. Nothing mean, he's just not the brightest. They made people pay for attending the ceremony. They made a profit of $100 total. Big bonus, one of the 6 friends that the groom chose to be best man was not so long ago accused of child abuse. Let's just say that most of the wedding pictures are not so wholesome anymore. Went to several dry no dancing allowed Methodist weddings of 2 young couples, all friends of my partner. One of the weddings, the couple had known each other for a while, but had only been dating for 40 days. The worst was when the bride walked down the aisle to a country Christian song, absolutely belting it at her future husband. She did not have a good voice, just screaming and sobbing, walking slowly down the aisle. The bride's father was the officiant, as it was his church. The ceremony took close to an hour, including when her father said, before they get to their vows, I want this couple to pray together. The bride and groom knelt and prayed together. I assume because the crowd could not hear a single word, just whispering and muttering, which I assume her dad could hear as he occasionally nodded and said amen. This couple's prayer lasted about 10 minutes. No music, prayers inaudible to the crowd. When they were done, her father said, boy, those prayers were beautiful. I wish everyone could have heard. The only thing happening during the prayer was that the bride's niece and nephew, maybe 2-year-old and 5-year-old, were running and talking and jumping on people and tugging on her train. No one addressed them, except their mother occasionally waving them over to her, which they would not. The ceremony had taken so long, I was starving. When we finally went to the reception in the fellowship hall, I found cupcakes, a couple of fruit platters, and goldfish crackers. I was very angry. Then, multiple of my partner's friends, whose young awkward dry Methodist weddings I had been to in the last year, came over to me and my partner playfully ribbing us about when we were going to get married and that I'd better get in line for the bouquet toss. I had just turned 17. My best man at my wedding, and one of my best friends growing up, was also best man for a friend of his in New York. His friend is Irish born, and he married an Irish American girl, so she wanted the wedding to be in Ireland. Her family and friends all travel over, and they have a really nice church service, and the wedding reception is in really fancy hotel and everything is pretty much perfect. My friend steps up to make the speech, and it's this brilliant story about a night in New York he and the groom had, along with the bride and my friend's girlfriend, where they all ended up in Coney Island in the middle of winter at 3 a.m. in the morning, and they two boys decided to go swimming. He talks about the madness of the night, but he remembers seeing the bride looking at the groom with love in her eyes while he swam in the freezing ocean, and from that moment he knew they would be together forever, and how she warmed him back up when he got out of the sea. Everyone loves the speech, and he gets a huge round of applause, but looks at the bride and groom and they are not smiling. Once the speeches are over, the groom grabs him in a hallway alone and goes, "What the fuck was that?" The best man is confused and was like, everyone loved it, that wasn't faking her, the bride, that night in Coney Island. So yeah, not only did he tell a story about some other chick at her wedding, the bride remembered that specific night when he came home soaking wet, and he had told a very different story. Cue the next day, where the best man is with the bride and groom on a very long car ride where neither of them are talking to him. I will note he made a great speech at my wedding, and no deep secrets were revealed. There are so many to list. A bachelorette party where the bride showed up hours late, spent the night saying everything wasn't good enough, got into a one-sided screaming fight with the maid of honor, and left in the morning without saying thank you to any of the bridesmaids who planned and hosted. A Jack and Jill or Stag and Do where the bride took the mick during the infamous toonie toss and publicly shamed people who she declared hadn't spent enough money. Things like, "What about you, Jeff? You've only put in $2. Go get more change. Let's keep this going." A bride who talked shit about her entire bridal party, claiming they weren't doing enough or weren't being supportive enough, so family members felt the need to step in and take over their duties. No messages were passed, so bridesmaids would show up to events to find out that mother of the bride had been told there was no cake, so now we have 2 cakes. Caused a lot of tension and alienated the wedding party to the point where almost no wedding guests spoke to the bridal party, and bridal party was literally waiting to be uninvited until the day of the wedding, although all promises were fulfilled on their end. Planning bachelorette, Jack and Jill, attending all events, making favors, centerpieces, etc., had a surprise real wedding at the rehearsal. Wouldn't have been so bad if they had told everyone, but they only told a few select people, who showed up in casual dressy attire, while the maid of honor was in a tank top / Birkenstocks, and most of the wedding party wasn't able to make it. Had a professional photographer attend to take photos of the real wedding, so those moments are saved forever. Pretty sure this was just to spite the wedding party who were unable to make it due to work / travel constraints. Also had a fight between bride and mother-in-law during the rehearsal / real wedding, right before walking down the aisle. It was over the order of the procession. Immediately after, the mother-in-law went to walk groom down the aisle and loudly proclaimed, "Well, now is your last chance to run." Bride bought bridesmaids gifts for only 2 of the 4 bridesmaids, and didn't speak to the 2 outcasts for the duration of the wedding, including leaving them out of the thank you during the reception speech. The bride went down the head table one by one, skipping over the 2 outcasted bridesmaids. Held the wedding in a field down the road from their house, but forgot to plan for logistics. Had bridesmaids setting up the tents and table settings the morning of the wedding, in between hair and makeup, which had to be redone because of the heat. Also forgot to figure out how to get the food from their house to the reception site, about a 2-minute drive, which resulted in the bride screaming at her mother right before dinner, in front of all the guests, about how she busts her as every day for these people and they can't even get this one thing done. Friends ended up borrowing a golf cart to bring the food over in time for dinner. 30-minute long speech from the bride and groom. A surprise funeral procession in the middle of the speeches, when sad music was played and members of the audience were called up to light a candle in memory of a past loved one. These guests were not warned beforehand and were visibly very upset. Tables were also crammed in, so close together, that guests had mobility issues in getting to the front, where candles had to be lit, so this part lasted at least 20 minutes, same song played on repeat, and concluded with the bride and groom lighting candles for their miscarriages. Bride and groom mentioned miscarriages so often in their 30-minute speech, that a tally was created by a guest to keep track. It was in the double digits. That's all I've got in the tank for now. Enjoy. I have so many. So many point my oldest sister's wedding. It's a Catholic ceremony. So it's friggin' long. It was my husband's boyfriend when this happened. First time at church. Ever. He did not understand what was happening. Halfway through I started to recognize the signs of a burnout. You know when you take a little kid out and at first they are good, but as the day goes on you recognize as they start to lose steam. That's what was happening with my husband. He starts begging me, telling me he's hungry. Finally the service is coming to a close. And then the priest goes, I would like to take this time to share with each of you my favorite song from the musical Pippin. And he starts singing at the top of his lungs. I don't know what is happening. I look around for context clues but everyone seems as confused as me. My husband asks if this happens during every ceremony. I asked my sister later what happened. She said the priest gave her no heads up. She was as surprised as we all were. That priest sang Frank Sinatra at the reception faking weird point my middle sister's wedding. We did the rehearsal. It went great. Our family friend was officiating the wedding. He was a popular pastor, so we had no worries. Day of the wedding my dad walks my sister down the aisle. When he gets to her husband the pastor doesn't say the line that they rehearsed. So my dad just stays there. We're all waiting for the cue, but it doesn't come. The pastor gets all the way through the vows with my dad still holding my sister's hand. Finally the pastor wakes up and says his line. My dad looks so relieved, but I think his nerves were shot, so he decided to make a joke. I guess I could give her to him. Maybe we should phone a friend? What does the audience think? Silence. He whispered okay and sits down. Same wedding. My sister married a redneck. I'm not trying to be a dick, but his family looked like it was still the 80s and acted like we were fancy whenever we did anything that costs money. Think Eddie in National Lampoon Vacation. His family and friends were all like that. So cut to the wedding. It's the end of the night and my brother-in-law announces it's time to decorate the car. We go out there with ballons and the wax you use to write stuff. My sister's new husband's friends go, we got it. Leave it to us. Having no choice we give them our supplies and watch. They can't figure out how to spell anything. How many D's are in wedding? Just one. I think just one. How do you spell ejaculate? Or should I just draw it? I'll just draw it. How big should I make her tigs? I think big. Look at the dick I drew. Now that's a nice looking cork. After 5 minutes, that car was covered in misspelled lewd slang with pornographic drawings to accompany it. My sister almost cried when she saw it. My poor parents wanted to die when my family and friends all went outside to wave to the couple as they drove off in a car covered in filth. My other sister's wedding. My sister has always been a weirdo loner. She's a dork. She married a dork. But he doesn't think she's a dork and neither does she. He thinks he's a hardcore anarchist punk. Really he's a chubby nerdy accountant. But whatevs. So they tell us at the faking wedding that they've planned a second day of celebration. The following day they wanted everyone to go to the bar her new husband's cousin owned because the new husband was getting his heavy metal band back together for one day to celebrate his new marriage and they were going to play at that bar. Mind you, this was a dive bar with sticky floors. That's fine if it's just us, but maybe don't guilt Nana into going. So we show up the next day and my sister is once again in her wedding dress with the same macube/hairdo, tiara included, that she obviously slept in. Turns out her husband couldn't play music if his life was on the line. We had to sit through 2 hours of sheety heavy metal at a bar that was closed, so no food or drinks. I hate all my sisters. Like, why couldn't I have brothers? Oh boy, do own weddings count? Let's run down the list. My wife wanted to get married at the beach, but was pissed off when none of her friends could afford to come. Was more pissed off when it ended up being only our parents and her grandparents. Actually told me nobody loved her on her wedding day. UHMOK. She was pissed off because after the ceremony some people who had come out on the balconies of the high rises to watch what was going on started cheering and even set off fireworks for us. It was faking cool as shit that total strangers were respectful to clear out of the immediate area for a few minutes so we could get pictures and do the ceremony, but no, to her it was annoying and she thought it was stupid. UHMOK. A month later during the reception she got pissed off at my mother because when the seating arrangements were made my grandmother was put in a seat where her wheelchair didn't fit right. So my mom literally just moved the chairs a few spots clockwise so grandma's wheelchair wouldn't be stabbing someone behind her in the crotch if they stood up the wrong way. This was equal in her eyes to my mother taking a sheet directly on her dress that day. She was so mad that she screamed at my mother before the reception started and then went to the dressing room and refused to come out. This led to me having to diplomatically explain to my mother, yeah, she's being a total bitch right now but maybe it's just stress. And then having to get my wife to actually come out to the reception point after the while screaming thing. Her MOH was pretty much in shock, totally faked a panic attack, and spent the rest of the evening in a room in the back of the venue laughing at us, I'm sure. During the mother-son dance, she turned her chair backwards because again, grandma's wheelchair, the DJ who was a friend of mine, and totally doing this as a favor to us, and truth be told, would have done it for free, but I wanted to pay him something other than free beer. So I told my wife I was going to give him $200 over PayPal for doing a fantastic job at it. She threw another fit, and at the end of the night he told me not to worry about it. I still sent him the money, and have to this day never told her that I paid him. He has also never spoken with me since, I'm guessing, because he was embarrassed and probably thought it was his fault we had a fight during the reception, but I'm pretty sure he missed like every other train wreck that day, so totally not your fault, dude. Her dad was pissed by the way she had acted leading up to this point, and there is a lot of shit that lead up to all of this, and basically started taking down the decorations and cleaning up tables while we were still dancing because he just wanted the fuck out of their point. Yeah, it was really bad. Don't worry though, perfect marriage since then. Ignore all my activity in the sub. I'm sure it's not related. My wife was roped into being a bridesmaid for an old friend that was getting married. She didn't want to be in the wedding, but felt obligated and knew the bride wouldn't have any other friends to ask if my wife declined. The wedding was out of town, so I was with her during the pre-wedding festivities and getting everything ready the day of. Since I was there, I offered to help with what I could. That was taken full advantage of. I've never done so much in so little time in my life. Nothing was planned out. The bride was literally Bridezilla and complained about different things all day. The groom was a goofy redneck dude that was useless when it came to helping. I honestly barely saw him all day. Several hours before the wedding, the bride realized no one had gotten lunch, so the groom came up to me and asked if I could go get everyone Chick-fil-A. Sure, I can do that. Not sure why a groomsman can't go, but whatever, it'll give me an excuse to leave. I came back with what they asked for and didn't get a thank you, which I didn't expect, and didn't get reimbursed. Whatever. The bride had several meltdowns throughout the day and even said she didn't want to go through with it, but changed her mind minutes before the ceremony. The refreshments at the reception was literally popcorn balls, Skittles, and punch. I wish I was joking. Once everything wrapped up, we were roped into completely cleaning up the church it was held at. Vacuuming, mopping, cleaning bathrooms, etc. We were preparing to leave when the groom asked me to take all of the audio equipment back to the person he had borrowed it from, since I didn't live too far from him. Okay, sure. It barely fit in my car. Keep in mind, I barely knew these people. We had never hung out with them, and even though my wife had known the bride since college, they weren't close. It was just an odd day. I used to own my own events bartending company. I have two stories, one more cringy than the other one. The so cringy thing I saw was when the bride threw mini stuffed animals instead of a bouquet after the ceremony. As far as I could tell, there was no backstory or inside joke. None of the guests understood what was happening, and they looked like dollar menu toys from McDonald's. While getting drinks at the bar, most of the guests told me they had no intention of keeping the toys. They were not in any way unique to the guest or event, just dollar store plush toys too. The actual cringy thing was actually kind of sad. The bride and groom were high school sweethearts and were getting married at 27 years old, so they have been together about 12 years prior to the wedding. Their venue was beautifully decorated and all the guests helped out with setting up and even offered to help me with the bar, although I didn't need it. Anyway, the groom gets sheet-faced just an hour into the reception. Every one of his friends insists on taking a shot with him, so he does. As the bartender I had a responsibility to monitor everyone's consumption, but I've never had to cut off the host/groom before, so I wrestled with how to handle it for a bit. Plus we were an hour in, so I didn't expect anyone to even be drunk when the food was being served. He wasn't driving, they rented a limo, so I definitely let it rock for longer than I probably should have. After about 90 minutes into the reception, I discreetly cut off the groom. I pulled each of his groomsmen and buddies aside and told them the groom has already had way too much. Most were cool and understood, but a couple of people kept sneaking him drinks. Someone would order 2 drinks, insist neither of them were going to the groom, but I'd see him on the dance floor with a drink just a few minutes later. The saddest thing is that I coordinated with the bride for months, and she is the sweetest client I've had to date. She spent 12 years with this guy, and on their wedding day he was clearly wrecked in all the pictures. The bride gave a touching speech at the end of the night. The groom was supposed to say a few words too, but he could barely stand unassisted, so the mic was taken from him after he garbled through his first couple sentences. After the event I apologized profusely to the bride for overserving and tried to offer a discount, but she would not have any of it. She said her husband decided to drink that much. We did not force him. She was nothing short of the classiest, nicest bride I have ever dealt with. I feel bad. Her wedding night was nothing close to what she probably dreamed of for the last decade plus. I've dealt with Bridezillas like you wouldn't believe. She definitely was not one of them and deserved a better night. In Germany there is a tradition that is called Brautversag, which loosely translates to kidnapping the bride. What usually happens is that the best man takes the bride to another room with some close friends of the bride. Later the groom has to search for them and then to some kind of challenge to get her back. For example, drinking some liquor. The most important thing about this is that it has to be entirely planned, because you need to prepare the room and the challenge, and the bride has to be fine with missing an hour of her wedding. At the wedding of a friend of mine, a super drunk guy who wasn't invited but still attended the wedding because he knew both bride and groom walked in during dinner in sweatpants and a stained shirt. At first everyone was obviously confused. The wedding couple talked to him and he was allowed to stay, but he wasn't allowed to drink any alcohol because he already was drunk. The evening progresses, and suddenly someone asks into the room where the bride is, followed by some jokes about the bride already leaving after just a couple of hours. Some shy laughter. The groom asks the mother of the bride where the bride is. She doesn't know, so he starts asking around, but no one knows it. Q 2 hours later, everyone is searching the place for the bride. Some people are thinking about calling the police when her mother's phone rings. It's the bride calling from a pub in another part of the city, where she semi-violently was taken to by the drunk guy, who thought it was funny to do a Brautversag, but didn't think about telling anyone. And that's how you not make friends at a wedding that you're not supposed to be at in the first place. Who am I to judge? So we go ahead and learn it. Day of the wedding, the bride tells me at 9:30 PM, you guys start playing our first dance. We won't be on the floor, but go ahead and keep playing. Rather unorthodox, but hey, it's her day. So 9:30 PM comes, we kick off and begin playing the song. We are about 30 seconds in. A lot of guests are standing around the dance floor looking rather confused. Then all of a sudden the husband bursts onto the dance floor wearing a Donald Trump mask, one of those rubber proper pro type ones, and he has a pistol in his hand. He's creeping around the floor as if he's looking for someone. Then his wife comes running onto the floor wearing a Kim Jong-il mask of the same professional quality. She also has a pistol. Unable to comprehend what the fuck is going on, I spend the next 3.5 minutes watching them circle the floor playing cops and robbers or some shit. At the end they run into each other's arms and start kissing each other with the masks still on. Then they took off the masks and everyone went about the rest of the night. Weirdest wedding moment of my musical career. Posted a few times before, but always a great story. Went to a wedding that my wife and I said will not last more than 2 years. The wedding was in the backyard of the bride's house. They had all the chairs and wedding arch set up outside. They set up a plastic tarp running down the aisle to walk on. Just before the wedding starts, there are darkening clouds appearing. Should have been a sign to move the wedding inside, but they invited too many people to the damn thing. Just as they start the wedding, it begins to rain lightly. The father of the bride is walking the bride down the lane and slips on the wet tarp and falls on his ass. Bride is now at the front, raining harder. People start to cover up with whatever they have. Some people start to get up too. Bride turns around and says to all, "This is my wedding. No one is going to ruin it. You better all faking sit your ass down." We all sit back down and the wedding resumes. It is now raining pretty good. The grass is now turning into mud. A few ladies in the crowd and the bridesmaids' makeup is now running down their faces. My wife has taken my jacket as a cover from the rain. They finish the vows and kiss, and then everyone runs to the house and garage to get out of the rain. Oh, remember how I said the grass was now mud? Yay, lots of people slipped and fell in the mud on the way to the house. We got to the house. Many people looked terrible from the running makeup, muddy clothing, and soaking wet. A few of the women had to cover their chests and waists due to wet clothing becoming see-through. Most of the men were loaning their coats to the ladies to cover up. Dirty looks all around. The wedding cake was outside and now brought in. The rain made the decorations on the cake turn all runny, and it looks horrible. The bride and groom began to cut the cake and feed each other. They smashed the cake pieces into each other's faces, then began a food fight with each other. My friend's wife got hit in the face with purple icing cake on her face and dress. The priest got hit with an yellow icing on his white robe. There was nothing left of the cake to serve. Food being served was still frozen in the middle of the food, and the stuff that was not frozen was burned. The dessert was supposed to be the cake, but as said above, there was nothing left. There was a goodie bag that people got on the way out. Had a lollipop, a coupon for ice cream cone at McDonald's, a pencil with the bride and groom name on it, and Halloween size M&Ms. My wife, whose dress was filthy, her makeup was out of whack, and her hair was a mess, said to me that she does not want to see those people again for 6 months. She was so mad. The couple divorced 11 months later when the groom came home from work and found his wife getting double teamed by 2 guys. This is a cousin of my husband. It was top to bottom cringe. Invitation comes in the mail with a card that said please. The only gift they want is contributions towards their honeymoon. You were directed to go to a website and buy them experiences like massages, beach horseback riding at sunrise, breakfast in bed, etc. No offense to those who've done that, it was just something we are not used to or had ever seen. I was a cake decorator in a past life, so family members get a free wedding cake. Although I didn't reach out to this beach because she's a beach. She reached out to me as soon as possible for her free cake. She wants 5 tiers of cake filled with fruit and mousse for 125 guests, with visions of 2 tiers going straight to the garbage. I said I'd do 3 for the amount of guests she was having. We went back and forth on email about this. She didn't care if 2 tiers were wasted. She wanted 5. I told her to have someone else do it then. She reluctantly agreed. Day of wedding ceremony at one location at 5 o'clock. Over by 5:30. We all leave, go to the reception at a very nice hotel. And then we sat and waited and sat and sat. No hors d'oeuvres. Cash bar. By 8:30 the bride and groom still hadn't shown up. Her parents were beside themselves because when they booked the hotel they ordered hot and cold hors d'oeuvres. Turns out, when they gave Bridezilla the money to pay the hotel, she cancelled the appetizers and used that money towards riding around in her limo for hours taking photos. The hotel felt bad and put out bowls of chips and pretzels, which people descended on like flies. The hotel called her and asked if they could start dinner service. She said no. Some people went home. Some people ran to McDonald's to get food for their kids. Most of us sat there with our dead phones and faking stew. They showed up at 8:50 ready to party, clueless as to why we were all ready to kill them. It took until almost 10 o'clock until all the dinners were out. The icing on the cake, pun intended, is that she said nothing to me about the cake because she was still pissed it was only 3 tiers. My mill had to make her thank me. And yes, they're already divorced. TLDR bride and groom demanded we contribute to their honeymoon. Bride was ungrateful. Chab her delicious, free wedding cake because it was too small. They made guests sit and wait at hotel for almost 3 hours with no apps plus a cash bar while they did pics. A few years ago my daughter's father and my ex-sister-in-law got married. Let me elaborate. Her father and I were together in high school when we conceived our daughter. We tried our best to make it work, but after 3 years we called it quits. It was pretty nasty. Meanwhile, my best friend, who was very active in my life, ended up marrying my brother. He's active military and he fell hard for her. They have 2 children. He went overseas and got his Dear John letters. They get a divorce. We stopped being friends. Years later, my ex and ex-best friend slash sister-in-law get engaged and I'm invited to the wedding. It was a shock, but I myself am married now. I hold very little ill will toward him as a person. Despite all this weird Maury Povich shit, we managed to co-parent successfully. Not to mention, my daughter was a part of the wedding and was very excited. She really wanted me to be there, so I went. Things were going good. The wedding was beautiful, decent food and open bar. Then someone from the wedding party purposed a toast and offered open mic. Nothing but crickets for an awkward amount of time. Then the bride's mother stands up. By the way, it's worth mentioning that she does not like me or my brother anyways. During the speech her mother starts talking about how it's about time you kids get married. You've been together since high school. Everyone claps and a waterfall effect takes place. Other family members and friends started sharing stories of their cheating events together and secret dates. Not only did they both cheat for years and through children and marriages, but apparently her whole family knew. The bride shot a look directly at me and mouthed, "I'm sorry." I politely excused myself to the bathroom and then leaving soon after. I haven't been to many weddings, but realizing your ex and ex-sister-in-law slash best friend had been in a relationship the whole time, I'd say that was weird to say the least. I really wish I saw this post earlier, because this is gonna disappear. A little backstory. My girlfriend's sister, E, and her fiancé at the time, K, are the trashiest people you've ever seen. K's parents both also smoke PCP. So we're at the ceremony. My girlfriend is the reverend, or whatever, up there marrying them, giving her beautiful speech. The entire time, K's mom is in the back talking and laughing, and everyone is looking at her and telling her to be quiet. She's all "oh you shoot up," and eventually K piped up and told her to shut the fuck up while getting married. After the ceremony, before the reception, she's basically screaming to her husband how everyone here is an asshole and people are just asking to get punched in the face, blah blah blah. The coup de grace. During the reception, it came time to cut the cake. As far as I know they both talked about it and both wanted to get caked. They cut the cake. K pushed cake into E's face and then she does it back to him. They're both laughing and smiling. It was very cute. Next thing you know, K's mom rushes up and grabs a piece of cake and slaps it into the bride's face. She walked away immediately screaming, "Nobody does that to my baby boy." I don't know why nobody kicked her out or anything after that, but she kept going with their shenanigans. At one point, the drinks start flowing and they start getting hammered. Next thing I know, her mother is standing on a table, very obviously drunk, dancing in the trashiest manner on the table. What really put the cherry on top was the husband was sitting on the bench below with his back to the table, arms spread across the table looking all cool, and his shirt off with nothing but a wife beater on his torso. He ended up taking his shirt and waving it around in a circle. Trashiest, funniest thing I've ever seen. Once it was time to go, we watched her and her husband hustle out of the venue and watched her grab their sign announcing the marriage happening that day. It was a beautiful sign. It was custom made by a CNC artist, and the bride's aunt paid for it, and it was also her gift to them. Yeah, she stole that sheet, threw it right in her truck and drove off. We all still talk about this over a year later. So I know my first post I said I hadn't been to many weddings, but I had totally blocked out about a year and a half when I worked in a country club that catered receptions. The stories. Y'all. One wedding was 2 kids I had graduated high school with several years earlier. They both worked at Zaxby's, so the reception was mostly food from there. But the bad part was an old high school friend who had hated me attended the party, and when she saw me working, she followed me around for like 2 hours trying to help. I was embarrassed for her. Another time, the bride and groom showed up to the reception an hour late and then spent another hour eating together in the super drab manager's office that we could barely fit a tiny table in. Why spend all that money on a fancy club hall and hid away in the peeling paint office? Another time, the band got wasted during their break and couldn't finish the set. That actually happened a couple times with different bands. Before my mom became the manager there, the old manager got drunk while working a reception, stole a golf cart with a lady, and crashed into the course pond. It totally destroyed the mood at the reception because everyone left the hall to go laugh at him and the woman. He got fired and my mom got the job. Okay, and best for last, an older woman at the reception got sheet-faced, ran to the bathroom to puke, passed out and sheet herself, woke up, took off her pants, and screamed in the bathroom until my mom investigated. They had to wrap her in a tablecloth and put her in a taxi because no one would help her home. She tried to offer to return the tablecloth, but my mom told her not to worry about it. Warning, long, I was a DJ in the 80s and 90s. I also owned the company, so anytime there was any hint that a client might be difficult, I took that dance for myself. This is one of those times I was booked from 6 PM until 1 AM, so I arrived around 5 PM to set up my equipment. At 5:30 PM I started playing some nice background music as the guests started arriving. Nothing was really out of the ordinary yet. I was relaxing and waiting for some hint from the master of ceremonies, MC, when speeches and dinner would happen. At 6:30 PM, although the hall was full with about 150 guests, there was no sign of the bridal party at all. No groomsmen, no bridesmaids, and certainly no sign of the bride or groom themselves. With nobody around to tell me what was happening, I just kept on playing the background music. I could tell the crowd was getting restless waiting for things to start, and I also wondered why I wasn't smelling any food or seeing any activity from catering staff. At 7 PM the crowd was getting more agitated, and kids are running around as parents give up on trying to control them in their seats. The mother of the bride finally made an announcement to the effect that the bridal party had some kind of delay, so can everyone please be patient. At 7:30 PM the kids have been running around long enough that they've worked up an appetite and are now asking their parents when they can eat. Still no sign of the bridal party. The background music continues to play. Around 8 PM the bridal party finally arrives, and it's very evident that they've been busy getting drunk and partying at their hotel. The whole lot of them are giggling and shouting as they stumble into the hall and get seated at the head table. I look around at the crowd and it's obvious they are all angry and very hungry. At this point one might think that they would skip some speeches and just start serving food to the hungry mob, but no, they don't. The speeches start, and due to the fact that the wedding party is all drunk, they are not good speeches at all. At some point during the best man's speech, he ends up telling stories of how he and the groom used to go partying and pick up women and have some really wild sex. The crowd is absolutely not into it at all. Nobody is laughing, and all of the speeches are a disaster. Finally, just before 9 PM the bride herself comes over and tells me the music for the dance can start. I'm utterly confused because nobody has eaten yet. Shouldn't I wait until after the dinner is over? It's now her turn to be confused, and she informs me that there is no dinner in tonight's program. There is only a late night snack to be served around 10 PM. I'm shocked and really don't know what to say. She's drunk and oblivious. I tell her fine, I'll start the music. The dance starts and I'm watching the crowd. I think it must have dawned on a few of them that the dinner they had all been waiting for wasn't coming. It was never coming. I play a few songs, but nobody is dancing, except the drunken bridal party. I don't know who said what to whom, but at about 9:15 PM the mother of the bride came up to me again and said she had an announcement to make. I turned down the music and she then told the guests that the late night snack would be served early, since it seems that some guests misunderstood and thought there would be a dinner, so they were apparently hungry. I turned the music back on and watched. It was like a movie scene where someone threw some fresh meat into a pool full of piranha. Everyone got up, grabbed some food, and sat back down to eat like they hadn't eaten for a month. Then they left. They were so mad at the ordeal that they just walked right out. By 9:45 PM there was nobody left in the hall except for me, the bridal party, and the parents of the bride and groom. Of course the bride was no crying hysterically because her wedding was ruined. The bridal party took off back to the hotel, leaving the parents around to clean up. At 10 p.m. the mother of the bride came up to me and told me to shut down the music and go home. I said no problem and handed her the bill. She looked at me like I was an idiot and said she wasn't paying that because I didn't play until 1 p.m. So I turned the music back on and kept playing like the party was still going on. She started yelling at me and I replied it wasn't my fault, that nobody was around to dance. Eventually she caved and wrote me a check. The final part of this story is me driving to her bank and cashing that check as soon as the bank was opened the following Monday morning. I had a really strong intuition, and of course it turned out I was right. The mother of the bride called me later that day. Apparently she had gone into the bank after I did and tried to put a stop payment on the check and was very angry to find out I was one step ahead of her. When I was in college, I used to work at one of the college-owned facilities as a banquet waiter at one wedding in Seekonk. The bride's younger brother did not like the groom. Shortly after everybody arrived for the reception, he got in the groom's face. The smarter members of his family pulled him away and apparently calmed him down. Fast forward and we are almost at the dessert course. The groom and the bride are having a dance out on the dance floor by themselves. They finish up, and she goes back to her seat at the head table. In front of everyone, the younger brother walks up to the groom and starts giving him lip. I didn't hear any of it. I could just tell by his aggressive stance and the groom's reaction that this was not supposed to be happening. The groom is slowly making his way towards the head table as this guy's chewing him up. I think the groom wanted his wife to be able to hear what this guy was saying. Well, this guy must have finally said enough. The groom punches him right in his mouth and he goes over the head table. The back of his head webs out the plate glass window behind him. I don't see him get up. I figure he's either out cold or dead. Then, just about every single table gets up and starts rushing at everybody else. I look at my section partner and we shrug and decide it's time to take a smoke break. On our way out, one dude steps in front of me, puts his hand flat on my chest, and asks me where the hell I think I'm going. My section partner, a very well trained and capable individual, comes from behind me and takes this guy down before I even processed what was going on. We make it out to the hallway and start heading for the break area. The matey comes running by and asks us what is going on. We tell him that the little brother was getting mouthy, the groom punched him and knocked him over the head table, and everybody was fighting everybody in there, so we are going to go get a cigarette, but if he wants us to call the cops on the way we are more than happy to do so. So, we end up calling the cops on the way down to the break room. We have a cigarette and then head back up. The entire place is destroyed. A lot of broken plates, a lot of thrown food, a couple broken tables, a couple broken chairs, a lot of broken glass, and a webbed window. We worked late cleaning that sucker up. The groom did swing by about 2 days later to say thank you and apologize. Okay, so I don't know if I can convey the weirdness and awkwardness of all this through a Reddit post. I think it was one of those things that you would have to see to understand just how cringe it was. An old family friend going back to when we were kids was getting married. Although our families were on good terms, we had drifted apart and hadn't really seen each other in perhaps 10 plus years. She was getting married at a church we went to back in the day that was so close to being like a cult. I have trouble saying that it definitely wasn't one. Her and her whole family were totally wrapped up in that crazy place. Point. When we got there I was immediately reminded why we left. Who the hell is this happy? It looks so fake. Seeing people I used to know is super weird. It's like I walked into a wormhole and was transported to a strange, unexplainably unnerving place. During the wedding the mother was wearing black and crying. There was lots of preaching. Then the groom got on one knee, took her hand, and sang this awful cringy song while she looked somewhere between dead inside and terrified. She didn't blink, she didn't move an inch while he sang this heart-jerking cringe fest song. I have never in my life witnessed something so fascinatingly uncomfortable. Everyone in the audience loved it. I wanted to run away as fast as I could. Something about this felt so wrong. Forced almost. During the reception, all the people I used to know from this crazy place want absolutely nothing to do with me. I'm not offended, I'm just disappointed. I approach the groom and bride. The groom is ecstatic and can't stop grinning. I imagine this is a big day for him. The bride won't even shake hands or look me in the eye. She was always a little shy, but something felt so off about it. I know you might think, well, maybe she was just nervous. It is her wedding after all. This church does strange things to people. You either change and become part of them, or you see what they are really like and leave repulsed. Edit. This place is hardcore. No alcohol, no birth control. Women are encouraged to wear dresses and jeans are frowned upon. Everyone is super warm and friendly and really makes you feel welcome. I think that's what draws people in. But the longer you stay, the more you realize a lot of duck shit is happening under the hood. It's funny, this place is in California, not the deep south. Amelia Island Plantation. I saw a groom try to fuck a bridesmaid in the foyer of the banquet hall, while all the sorority sisters were toasting the bride on stage. We were the band and we were on break hanging around the piano. These two clumsily bash through the door, oblivious that there's 4 guys in the corner. He hikes her up on this table, knocking drinks and flowers over 20-30 feet from us. I said, oh shit, isn't that the groom? He's got his back to us, and there's this blood-curdling scream. The guy noodling on the piano replies, I can't tell, but that's definitely the bride. She's standing in the doorway they just busted through, and there's the whole family, guests. Wedding planner screams at us to start playing immediately. So we hop up on the stage, but before we can kick off the second tune, people are on stage fighting over our mix, exes, in-laws, tearful confessions of infidelity, throwing drinks and blame. The German trophy wife starts screaming at the bass player, who unbeknownst to me had served in Germany in the army, so he's screaming back in German. We finish the set, I get the check, and as we are loading out, I see the mother of the bride telling her daughter that she just has to accept that that's just how men are. I walked up and said, that's bullshit. You deserve better. Get that sheet annulled. It was disgusting. They'd made a point of repeatedly mentioning that it was a $200K wedding too. As our drummer said afterwards in his Vidalia, Georgia accent, well, there's your proof. You can't buy class. Asking literally every person in attendance to do a small job at the wedding. My boyfriend and I were asked to refill the water and punch between the ceremony and the wedding. Little did we know, this also meant making the punch from scratch with no recipes, just a bunch of ingredients sitting in a shed. It was an outdoor wedding, and the hottest day of the year. The ceremony was insanely long with all of the attendees sitting directly in the sun. So we ran to the house once it was over to get the water refreshed, before making the punch. While making the punch I was then asked why none of the soft drinks were in coolers, wasn't told/asked to do this, didn't want to make a fuss, so we went and did it, then noticed all of the fake champagne, it was a dry wedding, which they conveniently forgot to tell anyone, was sitting in plastic wrapped boxes. So we put that on ice as well. Between making the punch, running ice back and forth, and refilling the water, my dress was covered in juice. At this point my boyfriend got pissed off and left to go to the liquor store. I didn't have a minute to socialize or visit with anyone. Then we find out that dinner is burger and potato chips. They didn't buy enough burgers and ran out of toppings and chips. I was exhausted from running back and forth. Then they go to do the toast to the bride, and I'm asked why the sparkling juice isn't on the tables. I grabbed my boyfriend and left. I was so pissed off and exhausted. I spent $500 between my dress, the wedding present, the ferry ride, and our hotel room, and was treated like a faking slave. I don't know if it fits, but this was very cringy. My best friend got married last week, in the middle of the pandemic. The bride and groom had been dating for 8 months and got engaged in February because the bride's family wouldn't let her move in with him if they weren't married. She also really wanted to be married in June, so they didn't push the date and decided to have a small ceremony with family last weekend. I'm not gonna get into the details, but this relationship had isolated the groom, my friend, from his friends. Well, since they were doing something small, and I'm very close with his family, I set up a surprise virtual appearance with the groom's sister and some of both the bride and groom's close friends. The plan was to have a Zoom meeting. The sister would open the computer during the cake cutting, and they would see all of us live sending our best wishes, etc. We made a group chat to organize everything, and the bride's friend said she had invited them to participate online and sent their marriage website link where the couple had posted pictures and their gift list. The bride's friend even sent an invitation the bride had made for best friends who were invited. Turns out the groom didn't invite any of his friends, including me, and none of us knew about the website or that even was a gift list. It was so cringy for the groom's friends to realize he deliberately didn't invite us for his celebration. Some were so hurt they didn't even show up for the Zoom meeting. When I was a professional audio engineer, I did a cheap gig for someone I knew. Not a friend, really, but our families had known each other for well over a decade. We did the rehearsal the day before, and it was as standard a wedding gig as you could do. Ceremony was decent, and there were about 150 or so people there. Reception took place in the same room as the ceremony, so everyone shuffled out, and as the room was being rearranged, a bridesmaid handed me an unlabeled CD and said that the bride and groom wanted this to be their first dance. Okay, last minute change, no problem, I can juggle CDs. I announce the first dance, they get to the floor and assume the formal dance position. I hit play on the CD, to which they begin dancing to Vivaldi or Mozart, something nice and sweet. Then there's this deafening, distorted record scratch, and everyone turned and stared at me for the 10 agonizing seconds of silence that took place, while a handful of their friends run out to the floor, before a flash mob to What Does the Fox Say happens. This was in 2015, 2 years after the song was popular, and even longer, since the wedding flash mob was on The Office, which was years after flash mobs in general were a thing. To do point, I'd have given them their $100 back to just not do it. I kinda hope they think back on it and feel their skin crawl half as much as I do. Cringiest would have to be the Bridezilla losing her sheet because the two 6-year-old girls and boys in the procession did nothing the way she wanted as far as coming down the aisle and carrying whatever and all that crap, and she made them don't over twice and likely would have a third time, except for half the kids noped out and their parents took them outside or somewhere. Marriage lasted a whopping 7 months and only that long because the groom had to find a new job before he left because he worked for her dad. Side note, the wedding I expected to be the cringiest was a Star Trek themed wedding. Bride and groom dressed as Klingons and did their vows in Klingon. Everyone was asked to dress as different Star Trek characters/races. Food was to be all Star Trek type stuff. Music as well. Everything. It was awesome. The wedding was actually a beautiful ceremony with the translation of the vows on a screen. The costumes worn by most of the attendees were spectacular. Seriously, some of these people had to spend hours getting ready. I also didn't realize how many aliens wear very little clothing. The music was good. The food was delicious. People had a great time. The people that were really into it didn't get pissy with those that either A, didn't dress in character, or B, didn't do it well. The parents of the bride and groom got into character to the point of their dads getting wasted and singing songs, which is apparently a Klingon thing. Everyone had a really good time, and it was surprisingly not corny. Years ago, a coworker invited me to her wedding. It was the trashiest cringe fest I've ever been to. Instead of mailing invites, she invited people on Facebook Messenger. Well, okay, but it also said to buy ob and mentioned that dress would be casual. It was at a state park pavilion, so that seemed legit. Then she messaged me privately asking if I could make a really large pan of scalloped potatoes. Sure, no problem. I wasn't able to attend the actual wedding because I had to work that morning, but I showed up at the outside reception, giant pan of scalloped potatoes in hand. The bride and groom had been drinking since early that morning, and when the wedding was over and everyone shows up at the pavilion, it was just chaos because there was a family reunion there. The bride said she didn't know it had to be reserved ahead of time. It's super hot out, and since she was drunk she starts shit with the poor folks at the reunion, yelling and crying, mascara and makeup running down her face. Ugh. So some of the guys picked up some picnic tables and put them together for the food. All these guests are showing up with big platters of food, so I realized the whole thing was potluck, not just me making something. The bride and her family made nothing. There weren't even drinks until her grandpa went home for a cooler and bought some ice and bottled water. The bride set a cardboard box on one of the tables for wedding cards. And before everyone had even finished eating, the bride and her new husband started opening the cards, sometimes making comments about the amount of money inside. I was so embarrassed for them. They didn't open any of the wrapped gifts. I got the hell out of there the second it was polite to leave. And that's my dumpster fire wedding story. I was 16-year-old, and my boyfriend and I arrived at the wedding of an uncle on the side of his estranged father. I know no one except my boyfriend, and he is freaked out he is going to see his dad, so we are stressed before we get there. Upon arrival in our finery, we are immediately separated, and I'm forced into manual labor by some stern-looking matron. She takes me into the dressing room with the groom and groomsmen, and tells them to all take off their pants and jackets and sets me up at an ironing board to iron their jackets and pants, while they all stand around in their shirts and underwear. She leaves me standing there looking terrified. None of the guy looked particularly threatening, so I decide to do as she asked. I have never ironed before, except to iron Girl Scout patches onto my sash when I was 10. I'm nervous but only fuck up on a jacket on some lesser groomsmen, and we cover up my blunder with a strategically placed corsage point. I'm relieved when she returns and escorts me to a seat so far back I can't see or hear anything. After the thankfully short ceremony, the guests are taken out a long dark corridor to a creek, where I'm shocked to discover they have rented rowboats and we are expected to row along a creek well after dark to the reception. The area by the water is decorated nicely with fairy lights, so we get into the boats alright, even in our formal wear. My boyfriend had less arm strength than I did as a dancer, so I did the heavy lifting on the rowing. Soon the creek is so dark no one can see. Boats are running into each other, people are yelling, some try to abandon the boats and scramble to shore, leaving a massive obstructions in the creek. I'm getting slivers in my hands from the oars, I'm cold, and by now I'm wet as well from splashing, and people ramming into us from behind. Those that make it to the reception are too wet and miserable to even stay. I'm not sure how the rest of the night went, because we left as soon as we arrived, and I had to walk, soaking wet in the dark, 2 miles in high heels back to the car. It was my first year in business as a photographer. 15 years ago, I was so green and eager, I booked any job I could. The groom hired me over the phone, didn't meet them till the wedding point just to set the scene. The wedding was at a very high-end bar in Chicago, Gold Coast. Ceremony goes off without a hitch. Everyone is at the bar getting drinks. I see the groom and say, hey, maybe now would be a good time for some family and couples photos. The restaurant had a gorgeous courtyard. He says sure, but the bride is in the bathroom with her friends. I volunteer to go get her. Even though the ladies' room had several stalls and a waiting area, the main door is blocked. Not locked, but blocked with an object or a person. I keep knocking, because I keep hearing voices, and finally the bride opens the door a bit, and tells me they are busy. I hear laughter behind her, and I'm slightly confused when I see her holding something that looks like a crack pipe. I watched way too many cop shows, lol, and one of the women yelling shut the door and she did. I do not see the bride for the rest of the night. I ask the groom what I should do, and he says just take random photos. I do that, and say my goodbye to him when the contract ends, and I leave. I don't really think too much about it. I convince myself that I did not see a crack pipe in the bride's hand, and when the photos are ready I send them to the groom. 2 days later the phone rings. It's the bride, and she's crying and yelling so much, I could hardly understand her. How could I ruin her wedding? There are no photos of her after the ceremony. Where are the pictures of her and the girls? And by girls, I mean middle-aged Karens. I'm absolutely speechless and shaking, and I know my career is over even before it began. She unloads on me for what seems like hours. By the end of the call I'm promising her that I will rent and pay for all the tuxes, hair and makeup, and the restaurant, because we need to redo all the photos that are missing. I just kept saying yes and okay, because what do I say anyway? Oh, I tried to get you for the photos, but you locked yourself in the bathroom and were too busy smoking crack to remember. I hang up the phone, and I'm crying so hard that I'm dry heaving. The phone rings again. It's the groom. He says, forget everything she said, and that she won't bother me again. He was right. I didn't hear anything for about 3 years, when out of the blue she sent me a friend request on FB. A buddy of mine married a girl we went to high school with. We always were into video games. Friday nights were spent with Halo, Guitar Hero / Rock Band, Smash Brothers, all the classics in the 2002-2015 time frame. They got married a year ahead of their actual ceremony because they couldn't afford a big wedding when they want. The ceremony was lacking most cringy things right up to the end with an Overwatch reference. You're the bastion to my Centra, then it gets bad. The real cringe starts at the reception. We get there, and they do all the typical first dance stuff. To Green Day, decent buffet, normal cake cutting shenanigans. Then the bride, groom, best man and maid of honor disappear behind a curtain in the ballroom, then a few more guests, then a few more, like an hour, no music, no dancing. I was catching up with friends when we decided to see what was going on. They were setting up a TV, a PS4, and backquote Rock Band. Guitar Hero with more instruments. Groom plays drums, maid of honor and best man on guitar, and the bride is singing. She's changed out of her dress and into jeans, torn t-shirt, and socks on her arms with finger holes cut in them. They perform an 8-song set, which was actually cut short from 12 due to lack of enthusiasm from the crowd. Songs by Green Day, Skillet, Nickelback, 3 Days Grace, and other bands with cult followings. She's not a good singer, not even a little bit. The maid of honor and best man don't play guitar. They played Guitar Hero guitars and missed notes. My buddy is a decent drummer, but no one noticed. That point TLDR sat around for most of the reception, while the bride and groom set up glorified karaoke to perform probably the cringiest set of songs ever. They divorced a little over a year ago. She cheated with someone she met in Discord. Not my current, so obviously, wedding in my hometown. I was bride, but I was living across country. Mom had to do much of the planning, being mindful that groom's family was poor, everything, despite them all having really good jobs. 5 million plus salesman, high-ranking Navy, and a literal rocket scientist. I chose a bridesmaid dress that I hated because it was cheap, trying to be aware of costs. My mom, newly divorced and struggling, offered to pay for the dresses to help with costs, as the groom's family was traveling. No, they wanted to beach instead. I wanted a small wedding. It ended up being 300 people because my husband's family decided they had to invite every person they ever knew. My family paid for everything except travel and hotel rooms. They didn't pay for rehearsal dinner, my bridal shower, nothing. At my bridal shower, my drunken future father-in-law hit on my newly engaged aunt. He was also newly engaged, and when his fiancée called him out on it, he got belligerent. My mom had to intervene and smooth things out. At the rehearsal dinner, my fiancé complained that my mother hadn't sprung for things like $100 a shot booze, that there were only 3 menu selections, that all of his family and friends weren't invited. We invited all the out-of-towners. Then, he left and went out with his friends and family, where they proceeded to try to infiltrate a classified government installation that they thought had a pool, and my mom had to talk to the police so they wouldn't get arrested. I didn't know any of this until after the day of the wedding. I went to pick up my future sister-in-law, as we had a spa and hair event planned. I got to the hotel, and she's not there. I go into the front desk, only to learn that my future father-in-law had taken her shopping, and they would not be back for hours. I went to my appointment, very sad, and cancelled all but the hair. When I arrived at the church, none of my fiance's family was there. We waited, and waited. I don't know how long it really was, but it was long. I wanted to grab my sister, jump in the limo, and run off. I had told my fiance that I wanted no drugs at the wedding. He promised. Partway through, I realized that his friends were keeping me busy. I excused myself to the ladies' room and began canvassing the hotel until I found the party room. I had to drag my underage sister, literally kicking and screaming, out of this room where they were doing massive amounts of drugs. It got worse from there. What I'm about to tell you is a true story. I was the best man at my brother's second wedding. First was just a quick courthouse thing. Me and my brother have never been close, but I think he felt obligated to ask me. The wedding went fine, but the reception is another story. Everything was going fine until I overheard my brother talking about the DJ making some rude remarks. I made some inquiries and found out the DJ said something like this. We better hurry this reception up because that old guy ain't gonna last until the first dance. He was referring to our grandfather. Me and my brother were fiercely protective of our grandparents. They practically raised us. My parents divorced when I was 1. My mom moved back home with me and my brother so she could keep working. Our grandparents got us up for school, took us to school, picked us up from school or any practices we had, made breakfast and packed our lunches. They were good people. So my brother took this comment by the DJ to heart. My girlfriend at this time had a little girl who wasn't mine, but I raised her like she was. She had to go back to our apartment because it was getting late and it was past her bedtime. So I walked her out to her car and kissed her goodbye. I told her I would see her later. When I came back in, my brother and Dave, this was my stepfather's ex-wife's son, were kicking the DJ while he was in the floor. They were not holding back, really faking this guy up. So I pulled both of them off of this guy and calmed them down. But this guy was pretty bad off. By this point, almost everyone had left. Some people helped the DJ load his car up with his equipment and sent him in his waypoint, but that's not the end of the story. A few years later, my life was honestly going very well. I was told I was getting a huge promotion and a bigger raise. The company was building a new service facility and I was going to run it. I went out to see a customer and take them some lunch. They spent about $8,000 a month with us. On my way, a guy rear-ended me as I was waiting to turn left. No big deal. Until a cop came to make sure we were okay. He ran my license and said I had a warrant. So he arrested me, impounded my company car, and sent me to Baltimore City Jail. I had no clue what was going on. My bail was denied. I finally got in touch with my lawyer about a week into my stay, and I was informed that the DJ went to the police and listed me as one of the people who beat him up. I lost my job. Finally I was granted bail. My lawyer cost me $3,000. But here's the kicker of the story. My brother was also charged with the same things I was charged with. I don't remember them all. But assault and battery with intent to harm were a few. And a bunch of other stuff. When it went to court, my brother didn't step up and tell the judge I had nothing to do with it. It was a distant relative, Dave. It figured he was going to jail and didn't want to go alone. He figured we would have each other's back in jail. We were found guilty with a 4-year suspended sentence and each had to pay $5,000 in fees to the DJ. My brother and I barely talk to each other now. I didn't speak to him for 4 years after the court case. We were never the same. And never will be. Back in 1971, I was a bridesmaid at a friend's wedding at a place called the Cameo Wedding Chapel, which had previously been called the Bull Road Wedding Chapel. Cue the snickers. Anyhow, the choice of venue was not the cringiest thing. What was cringy was the groom's cousin singing an off-key nightclubish version of The Look of Love midway through the ceremony. He was really letting it rip. I can hardly wait to hold you. Feel my arms around you. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I was embarrassed for all involved. However, that doesn't hold a candle to what happened following my wedding. After my morning wedding and reception, my mom invited some of her friends over to see the house she had recently bought. She had purchased several deli trays which circulated among the guests. My new husband and I had some snacks before we left on our driving honeymoon through the West Coast. The next day as we approached San Francisco we both started to feel a little queasy. By a couple of hours later, we had to stop and check into the nearest off-the-highway motel where we proceeded to be as sick as we've ever been before or since. I'll spare the details, but suffice it to say we both had salmonella poisoning, as did all of the people my mom had invited back to the house. The desk clerk saw our just married sign on the car and assigned us the honeymoon suite. This was a run-of-the-mill port in a storm place, and needless to say, there was no romance in that room. 2 days later we emerged, weakened minus a few pounds, and went on our way. Not a great start, but we are still married 47 years later. My wedding. We aren't terribly religious, but our officiant-to-be was the pastor of my fiance's church, who had known him from childhood, and who I had known since I joined the church 2 years prior. Well, 3 days before the wedding our pastor suffers a double hernia and won't be able to stand for a week, let alone officiate our wedding. Never fear, he reaches out to our sister church, and they offer their new pastor for our wedding. Great. Well, turns out this new pastor, who had never met us before, had some strong opinions about us as a couple. We were 18, and our son attended the wedding as a 7-month-old. He proceeded to deliver a full-length sermon, 30+ minutes, about the evils and dangers of sin, and how marriage was the remedy for living a sinful life. Our wedding party, musicians, ushers, everyone, were all comprised of our amazing group of friends, also 18, who did not attend this church, and had no idea what was going on. So we all stood at that altar for 30 minutes before the vows even began, being lectured about the dangers of fornication and sin. Pretty sure that pastor figured he cast an appropriately somber tone, and that we wouldn't last a year as a couple. Joke's on him. We had an amazing and fun wedding reception, dancing to burned mix CDs, and borrowed discs from our friends' cars. Everyone boogied down, including my baby in arms and my 70-year-old grandpa. My husband and I will celebrate our 17th wedding anniversary soon. The bride and groom specifically said that she is a grown-ass woman and doesn't need anything for the house, so just give them money. Wedding started 4 hours late, in summer, in South Carolina, at a venue with no air conditioning. Thank fuck they had fans, or people would have died. Her parents refused to be a part of it, so her son walked her down the aisle to marry someone he went to school with. Since the reception was supposed to be around a snacky time, rather than a meal, there wasn't much food. What food there was, had been left out in the heat for about 6 hours by the time we got to it. A few brave souls tried the chicken salad, at least one of them got sick from it. All of the ice had melted, so the drinks were hot. They had a giant mason jar next to the cake to collect the money they wanted in lieu of gifts. She got mad at me because I didn't bring anything, so I reminded her that her new husband owes me $200 and the only reason I hadn't brought it up was because I didn't want to mess up their day. Plus, she was the one who said she didn't want a gift, would have gladly given a gift, would not give money. So she refused to speak to me for the rest of the ordeal. There was a bouquet toss that only the bridesmaids participated in, overly sexual garter retrieval that led to everyone seeing that she wasn't wearing any panties, garter toss that no one wanted to do, so she made her son catch it, and a lake that no one was allowed to swim in. All in all, mess. Absolute mess. My Sil's wedding in Wyoming in 2016. The whole experience is a cringe. It was mid-May in the Wyoming mountains. They told no one what to expect weather-wise. Luckily, a guest at the rehearsal dinner told us to bring the extra blankets from the hotel. Thank goodness for that woman. It was 36 degrees, and I was dressed for 55 over 60 degree weather. The wedding was outdoors. The rehearsal dinner. Groom is from New Mexico and his mom cooked the dinner. It was roasted green pepper soup which did not agree to my taste buds, or my husband or their mom, so we had to hit up a drive-thru to grab burgers on our way back to the hotel. There were no other food options besides this soup. Sil did not do a wedding hotel block, despite her wedding taking place on graduation weekend of University of Wyoming. The closest we could find rooms that weren't $200+ per night was an hour away. The reception was held in the rec room of a church that was undergoing construction. The bathrooms had been demoed that week, so both the male and female restrooms were just rooms with toilets. No stalls, no sink, nothing. They hung up plastic tablecloths as dividers, but tape can only last so long. I had to escort their mother to the restroom and there was no grab bars, so she fell off the toilet at her daughter's wedding. And then we had to go into the kitchen, where the groom's mom was back preparing the food for the wedding, to wash her hands. If I had known this in advance, I would have offered to pay for those fancy trailer portable bathrooms to be outside the church. Their cake was made by a friend. The couple are very outdoorsy and go rock climbing, so the cake was decorated with real rocks. I almost cracked a tooth. My dad is a DJ and rents out photo booths for weddings. I worked an event for him in 2017 that was supposed to be a normal summer wedding. I get there, and the groom tells me where to go, and asks if I need help setting up. I decline. He hands me the payment for the event and I carry on with my job. The ceremony started an hour later. Everyone is in their seats in the courtyard. Bride, and groom are with the bridal party up front and everything looks really nice. The priest welcomes everyone to the ceremony and says that the couple has something they'd like to say. Bride, I hope you're happy mom, you were faking right? Groom, okay let me tell you all what happened. Bride, glaring at her mother. Groom, so, bride and I have talked this over, and because of recent events we have decided to separate. Bride, this is our breakup party. Welcome to the end of our relationship. Groom, we have rewritten our vows to fit the occasion, and we'll be reading them to each other now. Everyone was super uncomfortable now, and I'm right inside the venue hearing every word of what's being said on the other side of the doors next to me. I call my dad completely unsure of what to do, but he tells me to continue to do my job, since they already paid, and they paid for me to get a plate at dinner, so make sure I thank them. The rest of the night was as awkward as I expected. Dinner was silent, speeches were rapidly edited, and the dance floor became a yelling arena after the almost bride and almost groom got a little too drunk. I counted down the seconds to the end of my contracted hours and left as soon as I could. My dad and I went out for drinks the second I got back and could not stop laughing at how fucking weird it all was. But I guess, if everything is paid for and non-refundable, I could see why anyone would do it. LMAO. I was a DJ for a radio station's hire a DJ service, and I was hired to do a wedding for a spoiled rich brat of a woman over at a banquet hall attached to a college football stadium. I arrived, and since there was no easy service entrance to bring the equipment upstairs, it took me half again as long to get set up. I tried calling my boss to get another pair of hands to help, as it obviously was an expensive event. My boss told me that another DJ was having a worse night and he was over helping them, so I was on my own. I asked the younger relatives of the bride if anyone could assist in the unload and setup of the equipment, and was ignored, or they left to find someone and never returned. I sped through the setup as quickly as I could and asked my now ex-wife to come down and help me out with the remainder of the setup and to run interference during the reception. I asked the contact, the sister of the bride, if there was someone who I could ask questions of, or who could make decisions, of which she said that she was the person for that, and then she promptly left the reception to deal with an emergency and didn't find someone to take her place as my point of contact. So I make it through the reception dinner, and the bride arrives, and as irate as I'm not the DJ they had specifically hired. My company had a bad habit of doing that and not telling the client, so she was pissed that the DJ she wanted didn't show up and was telling everyone how she wanted a refund in front of me. Definitely the youngest Karen I'd ever met. I continue to perform rather well, but as I perform better once I get into the groove, the bride gets drunker and drunker and drunker, until it's about 11:30 and she's literally trying to get up and dance on top of the venue's large rear projection console TV, those giant, yet rather hollow, TV sets that used to be the size of an entire fireplace. I stopped the music and asked her to get down from the TV for her safety, and had insults drunkenly slurred at me until someone got her down. At 12 AM, I was ready to pack up and go home, but I was begged by the bride to stay for another hour to run the dance party of her friends who were all left. I didn't want to, and it is DJ's discretion, so I told her that I had my second job the next day and didn't want to stick around. Then her cousins took over and said that her father told them he'd tip really well if I stayed. I needed the money as a poor college student, so I stayed. At the end of the night, she again tried to get me to stay longer, which I refused, and she actually had to get dragged away by family as she was completely blottoed and just sat in the middle of the dancer floor screaming and crying that I was ruining her wedding. I apologized to the family and asked for my extra fee for staying longer, and was told to contact her father on Monday following and that he'd get me a check. I come to find out that this was not her actual wedding. Apparently she eloped with some guy her dad didn't approve of and got married on a beach in Hawaii, and this was just a reception for the rest of the family. I also found out that the entire family were a pack of rich liars. I called up the sister contact to get the fee. She told me to call her dad. I call the dad. He tells me that I was late in setup, 15 minutes, and brought a second person to the wedding, so he wasn't going to pay the extra fee. So I call my boss and say the guy won't pay the overage. He says he'll take care of it. I then get a call from him telling me that I need to come in and speak to his boss about it. And then some guy I never met told me that I deserved to not get the extra payment, from whom I found out was friends with the guy because I was an hour late and brought an employee to help. I reported my company to the Department of Labor as well as the Bureau of Labor and Industry the next day. A week later I got the check for the extra time I was owed, as well as a pink slip. Point a shame that I lost the job over a rich brat being a childish ponce, but those who enabled that behavior, especially my company, were 10 times worse than she was in her drunken state. They were all straight up duplicitous as holes. Well, I went to this wedding in India as a kid. It was an arranged marriage. Both the families were pretty well off, and the venue was a big resort in the outskirts of the city. So everything went without a hitch. Everyone enjoyed themselves. The food was great. Everyone was dancing, and there were no complaining egotistical relatives, which is actually rare for an Indian wedding. We were invited by the bride's family as we were close family friends of theirs. But near the end of the reception, everyone heard some screaming coming from the bride's mom. Shortly every relative from both the sides surrounded her, and the bride and the groom were nearby. She kept saying that she didn't care and she was going to take her daughter away and put a stop to this sham of marriage. My brother and I couldn't understand what brought this on. Later on we found out that the groom and his family had told everyone that he and the bride would go to US for their honeymoon, but apparently there was a problem with the visa and the trip had to be cancelled. They didn't tell this to the bride's family beforehand and had meant to kept it secret until the bride left with the groom. Meanwhile, the fight turned into a full-blown shouting match from both sides and both the sides started hurling insults at each other. The bride's father was still trying to save the marriage and was telling everyone to calm down. For some reason, the bride's father wanted my dad to act as a mediator because he was considered a level-headed person amongst their circle, even though he was younger than most of the people fighting. But my dad unsurprisingly wanted nothing to do with the fight, no matter how close he was with the family. So I don't know what excuse he made or the reasoning he gave, but as soon as the bride's father was distracted with the fight, he took my hand, my mom took my brother's hand, and we all started power walking across the resort trying to be inconspicuous. We went out from some sort of side service entrance, got in the car, and my dad literally squealed rubber getting out of there. We couldn't stop laughing all the way home. So after a couple of days I found out that the marriage was finally cancelled and the bride's family were planning to sue groom's family for the cost of the wedding. We still laugh to this day about how that wedding was cancelled just because of a botched honeymoon. I was the best man. Watch my friend pour his heart out in his vows, crying, making a scene, touching. You can tell he absolutely adores her. Little background info. She took his V card at 27 a turn. She laughs, pulls out a piece of paper. Starts with, when I first met you in college, I thought you were so obnoxious and pathetic. I couldn't stand to see you, and I hated when you came around. But over the years you grew on me, and I learned that it was easier to just deal with you. After college we stayed in touch through mutual friends, and with your persistence you finally got me to go out with you. As we've dated over the last 2 years, I've managed to overlook your flaws and your problems, and I've come to terms that you're actually a pretty good guy. Thanks for today. The whole run up to the wedding was one fiasco after another, and she was the worst Bridezilla. I told him in the beginning he was doing the wrong thing, but as his best friend I would stand by his side the whole time. Once the wedding was over I shook his hand, and I bid him a good life. Never spoke to him again. For those that think I'm being dramatic, she made him move into her mother's house, where they live to this day, and he is their errand boy. He works his union job, and then comes home to cater to both his wife and mother-in-law. She doesn't cook, clean, or even sleep in the same room, because she has stomach issues and needs to spread out. So help me, I'm still shaking my faking head. I've never met a nastier woman, a true saving Silverman situation. Everything about my uncle, 68, seeing a woman, 37, that was younger than his daughter, 41, was cringe-inducing. We were kind of always uncomfortable around her. She made her opinions known on how she didn't approve of non-vegan diets and how bad vaccines are. We dreaded when they came to visit because he was slowly changing into a more and more out there person. She voiced how happy she was that she wouldn't have to work anymore and relax on his retirement. Naturally, with this situation, the issue of a prenup comes up. She utterly refuses, and he relents. Now to the ceremony. It takes place in the living room at my grandfather's place. In attendance are about 8 people of close family. The other half couldn't bear to attend. There is such weird tension in the air at this time. When called over to the spot of the ceremony, family members kind of just shrug and half-heartedly make their way over. The minister gives the intro, and the couple are take their place and say their vows, and meanwhile their 2 dogs roam around. At a moment of silence there is a slow intense growl at their feet. Then the dogs explode in a howling fight. The couple and minister just plow on and pretend nothing is happening, like the dogs are bouncing off of them, and a claw rips part of her dress. The stress of the spectacle is incredible. Finally, after a solid 20 seconds of fighting, the dogs stop and the ceremony concludes. My uncle claims that they were so lost in each other that they hadn't even noticed a full-on dog fight at their feet. Even now, just typing this, the memory of it has made me cringe. I'm a former wedding planner and coordinator. I don't even know where to begin. I once had a bride decide to do a weekday wedding, which meant everyone skipped work for their wedding. Around 200 plus people showed up, which was amazing within itself. At the wedding, the bride wanted us to pass out tokens so only a selected people were able to eat and drink without paying and without letting us or the guests know. Once the guests finally sat down for dinner, she decided to cancel dancing and had people come up to a mic in the middle of the room and toast to her for 2.5 hours straight without mentioning the groom. At one point, the groom walked away and she didn't even notice. The guests left pissed too. At another wedding, we had hands down the most awful clients we have ever met. I mean, fighting during the meetings and wedding, and the bride would even scream at the groom for singing Counting Crows songs at the rehearsal. After the ceremony, my team and I noticed the whole group of like 100-ish people were all separated. When we walked up to a group to load them into a bus, we caught the guests talking to the groom's parents, and they said, why would he ever marry her? This is her 3rd wedding, and she is only 25. She is a horrible person. We didn't know at the time, but that was the first time she had ever met any of his family or his friends. Complete disaster. After the ceremony, they were whisked off to a private winery, which was around $60,000 to rent, and the bride served the guests boxed lunches because she didn't want to pay for catering. 3. I had another bride who actually turned her wedding registry into her Nordstrom shopping list on purpose and was asking the guests to buy her shoes and designer handbags. 4. I also interviewed a couple that wanted a 75 guest wedding at a private oceanfront estate. White linen dress code for the guests, whiskey cocktails for everyone, bluegrass band, a feast of pig roast, fish, farm to table fixing, really good wine, fire dancers, and a Cinderella cart to get the couple. Total desired price point, $7,000. They told me, I know you can do it. I have never earned so fast in my life. 5. The icing on the cake though was a speech by a father of the bride. After a few drinks he got up to speak and listed off everything he financially pays for her still, car payment, student loans, credit cards, and listed the totals and due dates. He then looks at the groom and says, it's your problem now, and puts the mic down and walks away. The entire wedding was beyond awkward. I could go on and on, but these are hands down the top 5. Oh. Was a bridesmaid for a friend who had a destination wedding in Boston. Most of us lived on the West Coast, but the groom was from Boston. The itinerary on their website said Friday, rehearsal dinner at restaurant. Saturday, ceremony at 6 p.m, reception immediately following. Sunday, farewell brunch at 10 a.m. in the bridal suite. During the planning process the bride said she'd hired a planner, so we didn't have to do anything. Anytime we asked her about the wedding, she said to ask her planner. This woman is an executive, so it wasn't unusual for her to delegate plans to her assistant. But the planner was extremely non-responsive. Finally, about 2 weeks before the wedding, the planner told us that the bride didn't want a shower or bachelorette party, to just arrive Friday to attend the rehearsal dinner. We show up to the restaurant and the planner stops us at the door. She tells us that she didn't plan for the bridal party, to be at the rehearsal dinner. She says it's just for immediate family. Now this bride was an only child and didn't have a lot of cousins so none of us in the bridal party were immediate family. But still, it's extremely common for the bridal party to be invited to the rehearsal dinner. We ended up going to a burger joint down the street. The next day goes off well, with everyone getting their makeup done and the ceremony starting on time. After the ceremony we take pictures. Then one of the bridesmaids asks what the meal is for the reception. The planner says there will be no meal at the reception, it's just champagne and cake. Now it's pretty unheard of to have a 6 p.m. wedding and not serve any type of food, especially if the invite says reception immediately following. It's the bride's day, it's what she wants, so we all smiled despite being ravenous. A lot of the guests were upset too. How do you have a wedding with no meal? After the cake we all piled into a taxi and found a taco truck point. We all decided to go to the farewell brunch the next morning together. I said that we should just make brunch plans for afterwards because I knew she wasn't going to have any food for us there. And she didn't. She and her family and his family we are sitting around a table eating brunch, and when we came to the room they got up, said thank you, gave us hugs, and wished us just a safe trip home. We flew all the way across the country, spent hundreds on our dresses, paid for our own makeup to be done, and paid for our own hotel, and this beach didn't feed us once. To this day I can text the word Boston to any of those other bridesmaids and they know exactly what I'm referring to. A bride and groom doing the dance, actions, and singing to backquote, "Love is an open door" from Frozen. It was especially awful because they kept practicing in front of people throughout the day to no music and everyone just thought they were being weird. They had this intense stare at each other during the whole routine. It was hideous. At another wedding the bride was 8 months pregnant and trying to wear a corset. The groom got absolutely wasted before the ceremony and was physically swaying during the whole thing. Then the bride found him copping off with one of the bridesmaids in the evening and divorced/annulled the wedding immediately. Oh, and the wedding was wrestling themed. At another wedding the bride and groom's flowers were late and one of the bridesmaids' bouquets was a bit limp looking. The florist was a friend of the family and attending the wedding. During the thank yous and after the best man had made his speech, the bride told the florist to stand up, everyone expecting a thank you, and told her the flowers were bad and that they expected more from her. I've never seen 100 people hold their breath at the same time. And lastly, this isn't to do with the bride and groom, but the stepdad of the bride. The bride was supposed to be given away by him, and as the music started to walk her down the aisle he bailed and started shouting at her saying he couldn't do it because he was nervous. The bride panicked and grabbed the first person she could see, which was one of the bar staff. This poor lad who was about 17 had to walk the bride down the aisle and give her away. It was surreal. Everyone looked so confused and her mother was furious. After the ceremony the groom had a physical fight with the stepdad and kicked him out of the wedding. I attended a wedding as a date of one of the 3 best men. Yes, the groom couldn't pick one, so all 3 of his groomsmen were best men. The wedding and reception were held in the backyard of the bride and groom's new house. After the wedding ceremony took place and the ceremony's guests finished lunch, many people showed up at the house because they had been invited to a housewarming party and were very surprised to learn it was a secret wedding reception. The wife of the pastor and I had never met prior to the event, but got to know one another well after sitting together during the wedding and eating together, while her husband and my date ate with the wedding party. Halfway through the housewarming party/wedding reception, the pastor's wife offered me a handful of gummy bears. Note, the reception food was random potluck dishes and snacks brought by the wedding party or close family/friends. There were bizarre options, so I didn't think twice. I didn't realize at the time of snacking, had a few glasses of wine, but the pastor's wife had slipped me an edible gummy in along the other regular gummy bears. About an hour later, when the edible kicked in, I realized I was high as balls. I was quite pissed because I hadn't willingly agreed to take one, but also was quite buzzed, so figured I'd quietly roll with it and be fine. No sense in upsetting my date on his best friend's day. My date and I had only been dating for 3 months. The pastor's wife and I took to the dance floor and were having a good time. I guess she had more than one gummy because she was very soon out of control. She eventually face plants on the floor and can't get up. She was hurt, but she's also stoned/drunk and laughing. The bride and groom can't figure out what's wrong. I keep dancing and laughing because, same. Eventually they pick the pastor's wife up and bring her to one of their bedrooms and put her to bed. I'm leading the cha-cha slide. It gets quite fuzzy and eventually I wake up, hours later, alone in a hotel room. I message my date and he's out with other people from the wedding, having steak at a restaurant. We find out later that towards the end of the reception, the bride and groom were snacking on the gummy bears and ended up getting stoned also. Apparently the pastor's wife had spiked the gummy bear bowl. Wedding was in Canada and the bride and groom were both originally from Nigeria. They didn't have a lot of money, so they held the reception in a big gymnasium in a community center. The room was packed with hundreds and hundreds of people sitting at tables. To save money the family had cooked and served food themselves, but it was really difficult for total volunteers to serve food to hundreds of people, so by the time the food got to people it was cold, and I think the cooks were overwhelmed because it wasn't very good. There also wasn't enough to go around, so no everyone got much food. What really mortified me though was when the bride and groom wanted to address the crowd, guests at tables just kept talking so no one could hear what they were saying. They had a very cheap Bluetooth speaker kind of dealer's era/V system, and it wasn't very loud. I could see the groom getting upset. At first he tried raising his voice and the guests still wouldn't quiet down, so then he tried just waiting and silently glaring at the crowd. Kind of like a teacher would do in class until the students quieted down, but even then the guests still wouldn't shut up. After alternating with shouting for people to be quiet and silent glaring, the groom eventually gave up. People just kept talking so noisily that they couldn't even make their remarks. I was so mortified for him. I really wanted to just shout for everyone to shut the fuck up and let the new liwat speak on their wedding day, but I was a coworker of the bride and one of the few white people there, so I wasn't about to go there. I just felt so bad for the couple because they had this pretty shabby venue. The food was terrible and cold, and their guests were just so disrespectful. I'm not sure if it's a cultural thing where you have to invite every distant relative/acquaintance to your wedding, but I thought it would have been so much better if they'd had a smaller event where fewer people could have had a better experience. I've been to a lot of weddings of people I don't really know because I'm a ballroom dance instructor, so a lot of times, after spending months teaching the couple their first dance, they'll invite me to the wedding, which is sweet. A few of the many things I've seen which were kind of cringe-worthy. Bride requested that her and the groom make their entrance to the song Single Ladies by Beyonce. My girlfriend was like, does she know she's at her wedding? Another wedding had the time of the ceremony listed earlier than the actual start. The ceremony was at a community theater, and when the guests got there the theater was bare. The listed start time was so that the guests would come and then be forced into setting up and decorating the room/stage for the wedding, which started like an hour or so later. Same wedding, right after they kissed as husband and wife, a big Samoan looking dude with a terribly thrown together costume of Doc from Back to the Future and very poor acting skills came down the aisle frantically yelling, "Wait, wait." Me and the other groomsmen almost tackled him cause we didn't know what his deal was. He proceeded to yell bride's name. Groom's name. "You have to come quick." "What is it?" replied the bride, with equally pitiful acting skill. He yelled, "It's your future. It's waiting for you," and aggressively pulled them off the stage and down the aisle. The guests who had to help decorate for this poorly coordinated piece of theatrical matrimony had no clue what the fuck went on. Edit. Ceremony not reception. My sister married a guy who did a dance with his best man to that Bad Touch song by the Bloodhound Gang. You know, the perfectly appropriate song for a wedding that goes, "You and me baby ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it," like they do on the Discovery Channel. I don't have a poker face, so I'm sure I looked on in confused horror. My sister was almost an hour late to the ceremony. I wasn't part of the wedding party, but for some reason I became in charge of Project Let's Faking Hurry You're Late for Your Own Wedding, you moron. Stress me the hell out. Her husband was livid. I guess he got her back with a strange dance with his best man too. That strange song. Said best man went to Harvard and my sister's now husband would bring it up constantly before, during and after the wedding. Pretty sure it was in his speech. At her point the mom was heavily pregnant and complained the entire day. Not really something the couple did wrong, but worth mentioning I suppose. One of her bridesmaids asked my then boyfriend if he could help her take her dress off so she could change the type of bra she was wearing. I was standing right there. Wasn't shocked. She was the type to be and was wasted by 2 p.m. and her shoes were off for most of the day. Small wedding and it was a cash bar. Don't kill me. I do think cash bars are tacky as hell, to be honest. It was just a cheaply done wedding, despite her husband constantly bragging how much he makes. I shelled out a lot of money to be there. I paid for the girl's hair, my flight from Toronto to Victoria and back, the hotel, dinners, gifts, etc. I went to see her a year later, and she said I couldn't stay with her at her house, so I had to get a hotel room. Super hospitable. I don't have a relationship with either of these people anymore. I don't like them, and I've given my sister many chances, but she's just betrayed me too many times. I know she's my sister, but if someone else cheats to you, I think sharing a bit of DNA is faking relevant. My god, one wedding I photographed comes to mind as the freakiest ever. I thought that shooting the groom and his 5 groomsmen in the tiniest room available in Australia with a broken convertible couch bed taking up the entire room was going to be the worst part of my day. No point when I walked up the driveway of the bride's house I thought to myself that this looks just a little like a crack den. When I crossed the threshold I got a massive hit of dog shit. Massive. The videographer and I were shown around the house and there was rubbish strewn everywhere. In every corner, on every surface, and every spare space was just crap and garbage. We went into the backyard as a last resort for a backdrop, but the origin of the initial smell was discovered with piles and piles of dog shit everywhere. We decided to shut the door between the kitchen and dining room, stick a chair in front and shoot the whole morning there. I asked for the bride's flowers, and I was shown into a room that wasn't on our original tour. This room was immaculate. I mean clean as a whistle. If only I could remove the life-sized mannequin of Jesus from the single bed in the middle of the room. Really, they had a fake dead Jesus covered up in a blanket like it was a real person, complete with thorn-affected scalp wounds with blood drops. Never seen this type of thing before, or since in my 16 years of shooting. The groom did it over the objections of the bride. My best friend's sister's wedding. My best friend's sister, we'll call her Brenda, is a nice, sweet, normal lady. Her husband, BJ, is a super religious metalhead who thinks he is hilarious. He is not funny at all. At every family party, prior to the wedding, BJ would insist on doing a choreographed karaoke to Meatloaf's Paradise by the Dashboard Light. BJ can't sing or dance, and that song is 8:29 long. The first time we ever saw it, Brenda reluctantly took part. It was as bad as you can imagine. But we all kinda chuckled because it was so awkward and fairly harmless. Brenda's new boyfriend is kind of a tool was the thought, but BJ thought it meant we loved it. So every single party he'd do his choreographed Meatloaf Paradise by the Dashboard Light karaoke routine by himself because Brenda refused to take part. Now to the wedding. We were all like, there's no faking way he's going to do this at the wedding, right? Brenda insists he has been instructed, under no circumstances, to do it. The DJ has been given instructions not to play that song. We all breathe a sigh of relief. Ceremony goes off fine enough. Reception is going well enough. Until, and I shit you not, BJ brings a faking boombox onto the dance floor. This was the 90s, grabs the mic, and asks Brenda to join him. I guess he'd been told by the DJ that the DJ isn't allowed to play the song. Brenda senses what is about to happen and won't join him on the dance floor. He's whining like a child and she's having none of it. So BJ calls his brother / best man to join him, and he does. BJ hits play on the boombox and proceeds to do an entire performance of Meatloaf's 8:29 song about underage lovers, where the guy coerces the girl to have sex on the premise that he loves her, only to absolutely lose interest once they sleep together. He does this entire performance with his best man / brother at his wedding in front of both families. We're all standing there faking gobsmacked. Brenda is absolutely motionless and BJ thinks he nails it. The clueless bastard even has the gall to take a faking bow at the end. He is met with silent stares of disbelief. Almost 30 years later, and as far as I know they are still married, so there's that. But yikes, it seems like even Michael Scott would be like, dude, read the room. I'm late to this party, but got to share a few from my homeschool childhood. Some older siblings of my friends got married around age 18 to 20 after a very strict courting engagement. They were only held hands after he asked her to marry him, couldn't full hug, only side hug, couldn't lean on each other, and kissing was definitely a big no-no. Finally they have their wedding, and the pastor marrying them arranged for a screen to be brought up so they could go behind it and have their first kiss in privacy. It was so bad. Another one when it was my friends. The groom was a self-taught blacksmith, and he forged swords for them to do a sword joining ceremony during their wedding. It consisted of the father of the bride, who was also the pastor and officiant, taking the sword and his daughter's hand together, giving them both to the groom, and then the groom and the bride raising their swords aloft together. I still have no idea what this was symbolic of. Last one, my brother was a groomsman for his friend who has a bride that literally insisted everyone call her princess. So of course her wedding was all things royal, and she demanded to be treated / look like a princess. She had prepared a song at the reception for her new husband, but I guess got stage fright and sang it in a quite off-key whisper to him. No one could understand what she was saying, and it was apparently the most awkward thing my brother has ever seen. My distant cousin's wife was a Bridezilla. They got married in a lovely ceremony, then the reception was in this stately mansion. The mansion was gorgeous, but not built to accommodate a wedding with over 200 people. The dance floor was a living room with a live band, too small, too loud. The buffet was served in the kitchen, which led to a line snaking from the kitchen down the narrow hallways throughout the house. Also, the exit was also the entrance, because the kitchen's other door led to the band's stage. Traffic jam. Also, for the northerners in the south, it was hot as balls. 3 groom's nieces, under the age of 7 and flower girls, were starving and the line was literally close to an hour long. Someone timed it. So, being kids, they saw a stack of donuts. Their grandmother, mother of the groom, told them to each grab a donut. Out of nowhere, bride shows up and starts verbally abusing these girls for eating the cake. Apparently, instead of a cake, they were quirky and had a stack of donuts. Cutting the cake entailed just picking up a donut. Also, they were purple and gross. After about an hour and a half, 2 hours of this nonsense, my grandmother rounded up her branch of the family and we went back to the hotel, where she ordered several trays of pizza, because almost none of us had eaten. The weirdest part is that the bride still brings up her amazing wedding as often as possible to talk about what a hit the donut cake, band, and mansion were. She's completely oblivious, or more likely doesn't care, that most of the groom's family left very early in the evening. A eulogy type toast was a weird one. Wasn't really the bride and groom but his family. My cousin, the bride, got married in as on my aunt and uncle's property. Nothing too fancy, it was a mobile home, and had a really nice deck and patio where they decorated and did the ceremony. Pretty much just family from both bride and groom sides. Ceremony was short and sweet, however when the ceremony ended, we all grabbed a plate and everyone was on the deck eating. The groom's parents stood up to toast the new liwats and things got really weird. The parents started off talking about the little boy they raised, and now he's all grown up blah blah blah. Then they started back on all these memories. Both were sobbing and it just seemed really sad. Then his aunt went off about how he was such a good person. She always knew how special he was. Sob sob sob. Then grandma and grandpa sobbing. Remembered all the good times with him and this and that. My husband and I and my whole family just kept looking at each other like WTH is happening. They literally never mentioned my cousin the bride, or gave any sort of nice blessing or anything. They simply sobbed about all his childhood memories and all the nice things about him, and it made it feel like a total funeral. It was awkward as heck, and we all just sat quietly eating the whole time. My poor cousin just sat with a pretty smile. My uncle and aunt gave a nice quick blessing and everyone sat in odd silence for a while. His family looked so miserable. Like they lost child. I felt so bad for her. She was way too pretty and just the sweetest gal. Way too good for the guy. He was such a big baby to his family and he treated her as of no importance. She left him, and it was totally understandable. They must've made her feel useless. I was at a wedding last summer at this beautiful vineyard. But everything went downhill very quickly. The bride kept everyone waiting outside in the hot sun for almost an hour. Then, when it came to putting on the rings, the groom slowly and gently put the ring on her finger and she loudly yelled, "Ouch, you're hurting me." When we sat down for dinner, the bride's mom told my aunt the bride had second thoughts and was about to ditch the whole wedding, which explained why the wedding was delayed. The couple looked super awkward and stiff during their first dance, as if they had never danced together before. The bride shouted, "Stop, stop, cut the music," halfway through the song, which was super awkward. One of the worst parts was the speech by the bride. She made it all about her and her achievements, like how she is becoming a lawyer, got a full ride scholarship, and studied abroad in college. No mention of how she and her husband met at all. She also had 5 or so sisters, but only her favorite sister was her bridesmaid. The rest of her bridesmaids were friends she met while studying abroad in Asia. Then, she went on to brag about her family, especially her dad. She literally turned to the groom and said, "You have big shoes to fill." At the cake cutting ceremony, she grabbed the piece of cake and slapped him in the face with it. All my family members and I looked at each other and said stuff like "ouch," that looked like it hurt, and couldn't believe she was being so aggressive. I don't think they are still together, and it's been less than a year. I was the bride and didn't want this to happen or even know what was going to go down. My DJ announced that someone was going to do a tribute dance to an aunt from my now ex's side of the family. My sister-in-law walks out into the middle of the space. She's wearing her simple purple bridesmaid's dress, has put on running sneakers, and a bright pink wig. She proceeds to dance a whole crappy routine to beauty school dropout from the movie Grease. Mother-in-law joins in, wearing a fancy dress and I think sneakers. They both dance around delighted to have the attention. Slowly the pink wig starts to come off the girl. She doesn't notice, and it starts to look like an alien head because of her hair under it. She also was not a great dancer, and it was faking awkward. My ex joined in, and I think, put on the wig. He can't dance either. I stood there with one of my best friend beside me, gripping her arm, and trying not to start crying. My maid of honor said she had to go hide, because it was so bad. Also during the wedding my ex got up on the table, while everyone was eating, and proceeded to play his bagpipes, while walking up and down the length of the table, which was over 100 foot. I again wanted to cry, but had to keep a straight face. He was stomping up and down over people's food and I hated it. My cousin brought the worst date ever who kept trying to touch me all over. He also tried to snuggle my mother, and she is not a touchy person. This guy was wearing a bright pink shirt and we later came to the conclusion that he was the wasrat. He took bottles of wine around and broke one on the pavement where PPL were dancing barefooted. He broke dishes in my parents' house and was saying weird shit all night. Even my very peaceful brother wanted to deck him. Also, my ex's best man gave a speech all about how much he loved my ex. He called him the bubbles to my bubble bath. I cringed so damn hard it hurt. He never mentioned the marriage, just how great my shitty ex was. At the end of the night I didn't even know where my ex was. I had to go all over to find him, and he did not want to leave. I pretty much had to beg him to leave with me. It was almost 2 am. TDRL. Ex family-in-law does dumb dance. Bad guests come. My ex was a turd like always. Marriage lasted a little over a year. It wasn't anyone in the wedding, but a random guy being a jerk. My mom got married to my stepdad on Glacier Point in Yosemite, which is a public area, so other park goers had every right to be there. Just before the ceremony was to start, about 5 or so minutes, my sister, cousins, and I go up to the people not a part of the wedding and politely let them know a wedding will be happening soon. How long the ceremony will be. My mom and I timed it. It took exactly 11.5 minutes. And if they could please not walk around the 1/3 of the Vista Point during it. Most people were very happy to agree, even said their best wishes to the bride and groom, and simply enjoyed the rest of the Vista not being used point. However, then there was this guy who decided that the exact spot my mom was supposed to say her vows was where he wanted to have his lunch, and kept refusing to move, because he didn't believe we had the correct authorization papers to make him move. Literal quote, my family and I use it as a joke all the time, even though I told him we had all the permits we needed and that we have this 1/3 of the vista reserved for the next 15 minutes. That's all the guy had to wait, was 15 minutes for us to get settled and have the ceremony. We ended up shifting over to the middle and having the ceremony because the guy wouldn't move. I did get some tasteful pictures of him stuffing his face and gave them to my mom as a 1-year anniversary gift, which she laughed about and put in the very back on her wedding album. Point before any gets on me for taking his picture. He was in a public place right in front of one of the best views in Yosemite. I was well within my rights. I was good friends with this couple in high school. The guy had crushed on the girl forever, but felt she was out of his league. She was 2 years older and super talented in art and music, plus had a job and money to spend, which was a big deal in high school. He was determined to win her over though, and they dated for 3 years, often talking about when they were married what life would be like. They broke up. I felt like I was their child and they were my divorced parents. They even often referred to their breakup as the divorce. 3 months later I was the wedding photographer for the girl, who was marrying the guy's older brother. Both families were cordial but visibly awkward. It was super small, maybe 20 guests if even, in a small town, so everyone knew the history. The event start to finish lasted only 3 to 5 hours. His mom sat next to her son who was previously supposedly going to marry this girl. He was the only sibling, not in the wedding party. During the ceremony she just looked sad for that son. During the reception a number of awkward things happened. This was around the time the movie The Proposal came out. Somebody had quilted a replica of the Babimaka from that movie and publicly gifted it to the couple, making a show of it and calling it the love quilt. The bride loudly exclaimed, "No, not the Babimaka," while laughing too loud, then proceeded to wrap it around herself and do a little dance with it. It stayed on display for the rest of the reception. The groom, who was obese, had sat on a slice of cake without noticing at some point. During a one-on-one dance, the bride noticed cake smeared on his ass and thigh and loudly pointed it out. The whole room laughed. He turned to see it, but physically couldn't, so I had to take a picture of his ass to show him. He didn't clean it up. He spread cake everywhere he sat. I checked in with a brother, who was the bride's ex, often to offer emotional support. He said he gave them 3 years exactly. I know these two better than anyone else in the room. They're both too unhealthy to have kids, so that won't tie them together. They're both bad with money, but too stubborn to admit it, so it will take exactly 3 years before they give in. He was right. They divorced 3 years later. Ever been to a gothic wedding on a budget? Because that was best friend. I love the dude to death, but holy shit was his wedding a little off kilter. It was a Victorian themed wedding. I use quotes, because while some of the clothing he made us wear was Victorian themed, it was more Western dapper Americana. We all had bowl hats that seemed okay, but our Victorian cloaks were hand sewn by the bride. The problem was, she got everyone's measurements off, so mine was like doing a fat guy in little coat type of thing. The reception and ceremony was in a nice hotel, but the ceremony was more gothic/Celtic themed, including a paganistic ritual at the start. The person doing the officiating couldn't stop crying because it was the bride's coven sister and she couldn't believe her sister was getting married and said so 20 times during the ceremony. What should have taken 15 minutes for the officiating turned into 45 minutes of everyone awkwardly staring at the officiant, unable to control herself and blubbering through the words. My best friend decided to swear on a gilded fairy tales book. The Grimm fairy tales book. I'll let that sink in. His point was to give her a happy ever after. Grimm fairy tales don't have a happy ever after. Kudos for the idea, but our execution was awkward and off point. The reception was cool until they started blasting EBM, and one of the husbands of the wedding party went full on breakdancing. That part was actually pretty awesome. Imagine a short pudgy dude doing the full helicopter on their head along with the spinning on their shoulders to get their momentum going. It was impressive and you'd totally got laid in the bathroom later. The reception would have gone off fine had the bride and groom not decided to open the floor to speeches, because you guessed it, the blubbering officiant took another 45 minutes for her speech. Lady should never do public speaking ever again, or at least gain some composure. So we had 2 hours of speeches. Cool point. I felt bad for my friend though. He had decided to move to Iowa with his wife without thinking clearly of the financial and social ramifications of it. They were convinced by the officiant to move there, so that was basically their honeymoon. Moving to Iowa. Well, that and a road trip across the US, they had a huge falling out with the officiant when she decided to abandon her children to move in with some random dude from Colorado. 2 years after moving there, they've left Iowa since then, so I'm glad about that. Oh boy, I've got a few, but I'll put the worst in a sub-comment to this, so I don't overwhelm anyone. The bride was nearly a half hour late to the venue because she had a hair appointment and spontaneously decided to get her nails done too. She was a bottle blonde and decided to go a bit lighter for the day. She looked like Daenerys Targaryen. It was a second marriage for the bride and a fourth for the groom. Her maid of honor was her late teenage daughter, maybe 20. It's been a few years. In the prom dress the bride picked out for her, the best man was the groom's uncle, who wore his best toupee for the occasion, but unfortunately it was a dark brown and the uncle's hair was not. The bride was led out by her father, an Alzheimer patient, who saw his granddaughter and then needed to be returned to his seat by the bride. Then the officiant said they wanted to start the ceremony with their favorite song, so the sound guy, and boy am I using that term loosely, played it off his Mac, complete with volume sounds, because he couldn't figure out how to turn them off. Point after the ceremony, it was time for pictures. It starts with bride and groom, then wedding party, then it's time for variations of family shots, bride with her brothers, groom with his niece and nephew, etc. Now, I mentioned this was not a first go round for either of them. They have 6 kids between them, so they get a few shots with them and his 2 daughters, the bride, his girls, and her daughter, groom with his sons, both of them with his sons and sons' wives where applicable. Then she wants a shot of just her and her family. So she calls out, by name, her daughter and her son, deliberately snubbing the son's wife of almost 4 years at that point. I'm his wife. The buffet was awful, beef, grilled fish, potatoes that were 90% salt, baked beans, and nothing green. The DJ was mediocre at best. It was a cash bar to keep the alcoholics at bay, but luckily the best man remembered his wallet, so he could buy the maid of honor a glass of wine. It was filled to the rim, and he brought it to the table himself, so he could ask her for a dance later, while she sat next to her boyfriend, and turned 10 shades of red. Then the best man sloshed wine down the front of her dress when he put the glass on the table. That marriage lasted 5 months. But, since she insisted on getting married on her birthday, she gets to remember her ex-husband annually. At my husband's cousin's wedding, the cringiest thing was the priest mentioning in his speech, I know there's a word for when the priest starts waxing poetic about the couple, but I have no idea what it is. That the bride told the priest she had had a dream about the groom, that the groom was her one true love, they'd get married, etc. after their first date. Right? Remember how you told me? The incredibly shy bride wore a strapless dress and you could see her blush spread down her neck, across her shoulders, and disappear down into her gown. Also, the mother of the groom wore a light pink prom dress. Why is this a thing? Why am I able to recall 2 weddings involving prom dresses that was backless, spaghetti strap, with sequins and beads all over the top half and floor-length tulle making up the bottom half? Kind of mad I lost that picture, but if I find it, I'll link it. It is not the bride and groom's doing, but mine. I have read several stories here, and I can say that mine is a misdemeanor at best. But here it goes. I was a kid at the time, 10 years old or maybe less, and my youngest aunt from my mother's side is getting married. It is a modest wedding from what I remember, in a small village in the mountains where my mother's family owns a huge house with a yard around it. After the ceremony we go to the house and the people invited, almost all relatives, get to eat, drink and listen to music in the big living room, around 50 people. My cousin and I are of the same age and we really got along, and he has brought that cassette tape recorder, which was a really cool piece of technology for us at the time. CDs and PCs existed, but their use was not that widespread, so we decide to grab a random cassette tape from the living room furniture, where my mother kept them, and record on it. Stuff like us talking nonsense, interviewing each other and singing whatever songs we knew back then. After we are done we put the cassette tape back where we found it, oblivious to what we just did. It is not long before we hear loud noises and laughter from the living room. We go to see what's going on, and we freeze when we realize that we taped over one of the cassettes that the couple wanted to play music from. Now everyone can hear us, and I want to disappear. While my cousin laughs, it was definitely embarrassing and cringy, but looking back I think it was kind of funny too. I don't know how I would have reacted if I was in their place, to be honest. Definition not the worst on here, but we went to a cousin's wedding, and they were both vegan. Points to start. The wedding was in a 3-story venue in an old city without handicap options. There were a couple of people who could not go upstairs to the ceremony or dinner, and could not go to the basement for dancing. They were stuck at the cleaned up happy hour the entire wedding. We made sure to take turns sitting with one aunt who couldn't do anything. I felt so bad for her. Cocktail hour had 3 items, and only one was good: mini grilled cheese sandwiches. People flocked, couldn't get them out to everyone. So everyone is starving through cocktail hour point, and had the wedding on Good Friday as a way to not serve meat. Welp, his mom put her foot down and said he will be giving a meat option. So dinner is set up on the top floor, and when we get up there it is family style at each table. And there are 2 chicken breasts for each table of 8 people and some weird vegan sides that were not good. God, I tried to eat them. So each person took their 2 slices of chicken and starved through dinner. Every side ran out, but there was no extra for people to eat. Our plates were bare. Thankfully I had Burger King on the 3-hour drive to the wedding, so I was not the hungriest person there. Now the highlight was the cake. She is an award-winning vegan baker, but sadly I did not get a piece, since everyone was starving and ate the cake as fast as they could. First wedding I have ever been to where people were excited for the cake. We didn't do much dancing, since we were sitting with our aunt upstairs away from the music. Point not cringy, just a really poorly planned wedding. But the couple was super happy. No one has ever said anything to them about how bad it was. They are super in love, which is what matters. But come on, feed your freaking guests edible food. I went to a wedding where the guests were expected to move church pews out of the way and set up tables and chairs for the reception. The ceremony itself was an hour to an hour and a half past the time it was supposed to start, so people were already irritated. Then it was about 2 to 3 hours after the ceremony when they brought out any sort of food. Nothing was organized. Cheat show. I went to a Pentecostal wedding when I was maybe 18 or 19 and was not aware of the dress code. I showed up with a strapless dress and received dirty looks all night. Also, people wouldn't let me or my family sit at their table at the reception. They kept saying no room here. It was literally a there's no room at the inn situation. Very Christian of them. Point my husband and I went to a wedding for one of his coworkers who he was not close to, as in I had never even heard of the dude before we got an invitation to their wedding. When we got there, it was the smallest wedding I've ever been to. I'm talking 20 guests in a venue for at least 100. Keep in mind, if this was a small wedding for closest friends and family members, that would have been fine. We just weren't close to him at all. Like, I had never met him. The groom had a massive Great Dane come out as his best man, and I guess it would have been cute if he had any other people in the wedding, but he didn't. It was clear that that really was his best man slash friend. Oh, and the bride wore tennis shoes and showed them off as she walked down the aisle, and they had some joke about her wanting to run. I felt awkward the whole night. One wedding I went to was pretty bad. Nobody thought the bride and groom should get married for a variety of reasons I won't go into, but the cringiest part was the wedding was obviously so poorly planned. It was a simple rectangular hotel function room with chairs. The only decorations were some crepe paper streamers, a few hand-blown balloons, a red bolt of fabric, and a hotel lectern, and they, the bride, groom, bridesmaids, and ushers, were still setting up an hour late. The preacher did not know the couple, but was a friend of a friend. He did not know there would be music. The music came from someone's laptop from a music service that played ads. No one knew their parts. The bridesmaids had unmatched red or maroon dresses. The ushers had normal business suit and red ties. No one remembered to get the cake. When they sent someone, he returned with a sheet cake. What happened to the wedding cake? That baker is closed on Sundays. I had to go to Costco. Reception was in the hotel restaurant and was breakfast buffet. That wasn't half bad, but odd for a wedding reception. The bride and groom gave speeches, but you couldn't hear them because the restaurant had no PA system. Also, it was shaped like the letter U, so one half couldn't even see it. On top of all that, there were many small parts where it was obvious it was just thrown together last minute, haphazardly, with no previous run-through or rehearsals. While the bride and groom seemed harried, confused, and rushed, they didn't seem too upset either. So while it was cringy, they seemed happy. Point as far as I know, they are actually still together. I was a bartender for a banquet hall, so I've seen a lot of trashy people. It was a very nice banquet hall, but doesn't mean classy people rent it by any means. I was working one wedding of like 250 people and the bridal party was huge, like 24 bridesmaids and groomsmen in horrible lilac and green colors. The cocktail hour was mostly them, and bride and groom all drinking heavily and getting sheet-faced before the appetizers even made their rounds. They were requesting shots, but our county had an don't alcohol or at open bars, so we legally had to serve on ice. I explained this several times, even had a manager announce that, as they kept asking. There were grumbles but no one complained. Dinner came up, and we served the cake, which the bride nearly ripped off the table trying to smash hubby in the face with a fistful, and reopened the bar after. Everyone in the bridal party is wasted beyond recognition. The groom is so gone, he keeps trying to pay for drinks, so I just keep pointing to the tip jar, and he kept shoving $10s in. My co-bartender is flinging drinks like a maniac and we are barely keeping up. My manager steps in, so we have 3 on bar to keep up with these booze hounds. About 30 minutes after dinner, bride comes up to me and asks for a shot of Crown. I explain again about the shot policy and tell her I will put 1 cube of ice in it to make it legal. She loses it. She starts screaming that I'm ruining her big day and that I'm a beach. Tries grabbing bottles from behind the bar, but only grabs a glass instead. She whips the glass at me, misses by a mile, but ends up shattering the mirror behind the bar and a tray of wine glasses. My manager is dumb boyfriend downed and the whole room is staring at her. Security comes and the bride ends up getting arrested at her own wedding because she's getting violent with them, so they called the police. The groom, meanwhile, has been trying to give his phone number to any server who comes near him and has completely ignored the situation. Father of the bride comes over to the bar, throws $300 into the tip jar, and just apologizes profusely. We kept the bar open for the time they paid for, and the wedding kept going even after all that. It was the wildest night of my time bartending, but also the most lucrative. I made over $1,500 in just tips, and have a fun story about it too. My dad's best friend's kid, who is the same age as me, 25, got married 2 to 3 years ago. It was the most redneck thing I have seen to date. I grew up in the country in Wisconsin, so I feel like that is saying something. Anyways, the men are all in camouflage vests, the women are in purple dresses, bride in white. On all of the tables are her favorite books, with camouflage things sprinkled around. This I can deal with. The drinks included Mountain Dew, Busch Lights, and various flavors above. There were multiple people there all dressed in fancy camo, and some people just dressed in street clothes. I wore a button-up long sleeve and khakis, and I felt extremely overdressed. After the wedding before the dinner, the whole wedding party went up front of everyone and said they had an announcement to make. They then all proceeded to open a bottle of Smirnoff Ice, get down on one knee, and chugged it. Then said we could all go eat. I went to the bathroom after this, and found out that there were balls in the men's and women's bathrooms that were sitting on the sink that were full of condoms and pregnancy tests. For some reason the bride thought that was a good idea. I was so uncomfortable at this wedding that after I ate I ditched my parents and told them to come get me at a nearby bar when they were done with the wedding. I think they only lasted 30 minutes longer than I did. This is a long one. Drove 8 hours to be the best man at my cousin's wedding. Most of his side of the family had to make the same 8-hour drive. A couple of things made it awkward. It was up a mountain at a house with a big plot of lane, but with only a 2-lane road. To get there, bride scheduled it at the same time as a yearly apple picking festival. The road was jammed all the way up. The groom was in charge of setting up a lot of the event, but he wouldn't make a decision on anything unless the bride approved it. The bride was coordinating the day and was locked up in a bedroom getting ready while giving out orders. The guest arrived. Everything got set up, but the bride was not ready. The guest waited in the open field and it started drizzling. Then after about an hour, the rain clouds moved on and it was just hot sun blasting down on them. Meanwhile, the groom was hanging out in the garage with friends drinking. All the guests could hear them laughing and having fun in the shade of the garage the whole time. The bride was finally ready. She gave her final instructions and the ceremony finally started. It only lasted about 15 minutes. Then everyone sat at some tables to eat. Groom's mother was asked to say some words. I had to translate for her. As she spoke, she had to pause to ask me what the bride's name was, and of course the mic picked it up so everyone heard. It was very awkward to stand up there after that point. Bride never went to say hi to groom's side of the family, and after everyone ate, the friends and family that drove 8 hours to get there quickly left to a bar. My son married a gal whose personality was a little odd. Since I had previously owned a floral shop, I offered to help her with her flowers and other wedding arrangements because I would see how things were set up when I would deliver flowers. She turned me down, stating she wanted to do things her own way. Since she did some of the most ignorant things on a daily basis, I should have known the wedding and reception would be different. The strangest thing she did was at the reception. When the music started, the bride and groom didn't dance the traditional first dance. She started going from table to table and informed the men they had to dance with her and give her money. She told my son's grandfather that he needed to give her a high dollar bill, as in $50 or $100, since he probably wouldn't see them anymore, and it was better to give them money now, since they wouldn't come to their Christmas gatherings. My in-laws had the best family gatherings. Yes, she did actually say that. My father-in-law is very conservative, but a very lovely and kind man. I just wanted to crawl under the table. After she danced with all the men, she ran to my son waving the money in the air and drags him to their car to go on their honeymoon. No goodbyes to their guests, just took off. They were only married 6 months. Thank you. She always did really weird things, but I accepted her and treated her well because my son loved her, but I was glad I probably wouldn't be seeing her anymore. The DJ started playing Ning Closer, I think it's called, the song that says I want to fuck you like an animal at the reception. I was really close friends with the bride, and she and the groom hadn't given him a specific playlist for the entire reception, just 6 or 7 specific songs, and asked him to just play others that were kind of similar to the general style the rest of the time. They weren't picky. He said that was fine, and that he was really glad that they weren't giving him a detailed 2-page long list like a lot of his other clients did. The ones that they asked for weren't all country songs, but weren't even close to Nin style Mayo. Sweet first dance song, father/daughter and mother/son songs, their song, and a few light-hearted and popular, but non-parental guidance ones that people could have fun dancing to. He was an officer in the military and the wedding was in the chapel on the military base, the reception in a special event room right off the officers club/bar. It was a pretty fancy wedding, a nice reception with good appetizers, meals, gorgeous cake. Both of their families and a lot of friends had traveled from pretty far away to attend it. And the bride's family is Southern. Not hick/uneducated Southern, if that's what you're thinking. I'm definitely not insulting people from the South, or implying that stereotype is true. I'm from the South too. Her family just had old money, or whatever the heck they call it. She went to a cotillion finishing school and middle school that ended with a formal party, had a debutante ball, her female relatives were active in ladies clubs, all that stuff. Nobody got into all that in the small southern town that I grew up in. I only knew that it was popular in hers from looking at her old picture albums and asking about it. Anyway, her wedding dress was actually first worn by her great-great-grandmother or maybe farther back. OFC, there were many alterations as it went through different brides over the years, so it was beautiful and fit in with the general early 2000s wedding dress styles, except it had a train that was probably 20 feet long. Mayo. She recognized what the song was before the lyrics started. Seeing her panicked run across the room trying to get to the DJ as fast as she could, while holding that quickly wadded train in both arms and breathlessly saying my grandmother is here. Oh my god, no was hilarious and scary. I still cannot believe that she managed to get close enough to the DJ room and get their attention fast enough that he changed the music before questionable lyrics started. Bahaha. I also can't believe that the DJ was dumb enough to play that at a fancy wedding reception with a long table of senior citizen family members. Lol. They were paying him very well, like twice the amount that most DJs in the area charged, and were really nice to him and his crew even after the aborted attempt at playing the song. The servers brought them all of the same food that other guests had, and drinks from the open bar throughout the reception. Not enough to get them drunk right then, but both bride and groom had told them more than once leading up to the wedding, and on the actual wedding day itself, that they'd be leaving the bar tab open for them, and they could stay for as long as they wanted to and order whatever they wanted there afterwards. Friend's husband was definitely pissed, but did a good job at acting like he wasn't. Bride had to go back to the dressing room area so that the bridesmaids could help her calm down, not puke, and try to fix and unwrinkle the longest train that her family considered to be a sentimentally priceless heirloom. She and our friends laughed until we cried about that whole thing a few weeks later. I'm just glad that she didn't fall and break her legs, fall on or knock over people or a table of food in her mad dash to the DJ room. She was more thankful that her 90-year-old grandma didn't hear the lyrics and die of a stroke at her wedding reception. Lol. I've tried very hard to forget this. Thanks Reddit. Very informal wedding. Neighbor I talked to a couple times, but didn't know that well. Started a conversation with what are you doing later today, and ended with well, I need a favor. Apparently she was ordained and marrying someone in a few hours. Would my husband and I please come? Completely wanted to nope right out of there, but couldn't make up an excuse fast enough. 3 hours later, we find ourselves walking across the street to her house. Hub's giving me the death stare the whole way. Knock on the door, and are ushered in by a guy in his 60s. Standing in the same room as a girl in her 20s who I assume is the bride. No idea where anyone else is. I assumed door usherer was her dad. So did my husband apparently, because his comment about giving his daughter away didn't sit well. He was talking to the groom. After many moments of awkward silence, the ordained neighbor lady comes in the room, in full choir attire. Or maybe she was attending a graduation. At this point she's the only one dressed up. We were told to come in casual clothes. Bride and groom are in jeans/t-shirts. We are it. None else is even in the house. So now I know why we are here. Witnesses. Why didn't I see it before? I knew there was something weird about her wanting us to be there, but completely didn't think WTH. Super cringy to leave now and awkwardly sit on the couch. Ceremony is being held in the living room. Ceremony, blah blah blah. We get to the spot about a bay where the bride stops and says she can't continue unless that part is removed. Apparently they have not even looked at their vows until now. A 10-minute discussion ensues about what exactly they want said during their vows, and we restart from the very beginning. Bride walks down the hall and everything. My hub's dagger eyes are starting to leave mark on me at this point. Like WTH did you get me into? Finally get through it to the end of the vows. I admit I looked away during the kiss. This dude could be her grandpa. Time to sign papers. We are here. I saw it. It happened. Let's sign the damn thing quick and get the hell out. Point. While graduation choir lady is taking forever organizing the paperwork. How hard can it be? Bride starts going into a speech about how she's so glad she's found her guy and how he stuck with her thick and thin through all of her mistakes she's made with other men. Oh my god. By this time my husband's just staring open mouthed. He signs. I sign. I grab his hand and say welp. Got to go. We've got this thing. Still not sure if I said that in the house or if we were running down the driveway by then. Point. Never saw the couple again and moved a few months later. Don't speak to the old neighbor. Every once in a while my husband brings it up. Pour cringe salt in the wound in that. Mostly we pretend it didn't happen. My cousin's wedding. Father of the bride offered his farm up as a venue. The farm was a recent acquisition following a divorce, so we had no idea what to expect. The father, an alcoholic, pointed to a parking spot as we arrived and slurred out a SSSSSSSS because he was too drunk to speak. There was no bathroom, so the women set up an array of sheets around a bucket. Elderly family members struggled to maneuver through the uneven terrain overgrown with grass in many areas. The father's boss had to cook all the hot dogs because father was too drunk. Groom's side of the family loved it. They were running around, jumping on and off vehicles and picnic tables, and wrestling in the field. The groom hastily dry shaved outside amongst all the guests 5 minutes before the wedding. During the ceremony, the officiant/pastor made a long speech about how wonderful the groom was and praised his involvement in the church. We were all very confused because the groom is a drug addict, a deadbeat who struggles to hold a job more than a couple weeks, has debilitating issues that prevent him from doing anything but miraculously disappears during his 6 hours of video games every day, unpleasant, stupid, poor hygiene. He was 10 or 15 years older than the bride, and it was a bit skeevy when he met her in her early 20s. He had no redeeming qualities. He was just an escape route from an abusive and alcoholic family that took advantage of the bride. That hasn't changed in the years they've been together. She's great with the children. He's terribly verbally abusive and negligent. So at the end of the wedding, a second officiant/pastor jumps up and shouts, "I now pronounce you man and wife," and sits down again. The first pastor wasn't legit, so he couldn't legally marry them. My cousins got married, and my other cousin, brother-in-law of the groom's grandmother, officiated because he's a pastor. Except he's the kind of wacko who doesn't believe in dinosaurs, and yelled at me for saying I don't want to have biological kids. I have genetic disorders. Sue me for not wanting to pass that on. He also constantly tries to convert me. I'm Jewish, just so you know the kind of pushy person we are talking about. Prior to the wedding, the bride said leave out the obey and honor and obey. The officiant agrees. Then during the damn wedding, he puts in obey. You cold heard a pin drop and the bride's mother audibly gasped. There was a beat and the bride finally said, well, I guess I have to say yes now. Then the officiant acknowledged, putting in obey when he wasn't supposed to. He makes a big speech about how wives have to obey their husbands to honor Jesus, which is pretty uncomfortable since the couple isn't super religious and their friends certainly weren't. There were a lot of tattoos. The couple didn't talk to the officiant or his wife during the reception or for a while afterwards. They only started talking to them when the officiant had a stroke and definitely looked like he was going to die. He's still alive, but he's had several more strokes and a heart attack. No, I don't know how. The couple is still married and are expecting their third child soon. It wasn't the bride and groom, but instead the best man. The original best man had to back out about 3 months before the wedding as he was military and being deployed overseas. Hence he would not be in the country or able to come back for the wedding. The substitute best man didn't do much to help out with anything, despite having been involved from day one. I, the maid of honor, ended up throwing and paying for both the bachelorette and bachelor parties because the groomsman, but specifically the best man, dropped the ball majorly. Awkward. When we got to the reception, where we had previously agreed the best man would be making the first speech, he shoved the mic in my direction, telling me that another groomsman hadn't written his speech for him, like he'd said he would, and that he was too nervous to go first. After I made my speech and handed the mic back to him, he spent a solid 30 seconds demanding to know how he was supposed to follow that and literally flop sweating. He then gave the cringiest speech I have ever heard, detailing the story of his friendship with the groom, how he hadn't liked the bride, and how she had interfered with his relationship with the groom. This went on for a good 10 minutes. After the fact, I had no less than 5 folks I'd just met that day come ask me if the best man was in fact gay and in love with the groom. Before the wedding, I'd have said no. Now, went to a wedding where the bride had only had 2 serious boyfriends, the man she was marrying, and one of my friends, who was at the wedding. It wasn't a big deal though, they split mutually. He was best friends with the groom. He probably would have been best man, but all parties agreed that would have been awkward, and it had been just after high school when they broke up, so there were no mixed feelings, etc. However, the bride's parents give their speech and proceed to talk about some of her past boyfriends were really bad influences. Yeah, she only had one mom and dad. to his credit, the ex thought it was hilarious, while the bride and groom were mortified. They apologized profusely afterwards. Her parents were puzzled how he knew we never used his name. Then there was the best man at another wedding who proceeded to talk about all the one-night stands the groom had in his heyday, and how he once professed having a crush on the bride's sister. There was the wedding, where I suddenly became a bridesmaid on the day of the wedding, literally 2 hours prior. One of the bridesmaids had become sick. I got picked because I knew the bride and fit into the sick bridesmaid's dress. Then there was the wedding, where the bride's parents were divorced. Dad showed up with his new wife, which he was asked/told not to. So her mom was giving her speech, then went off script and started slamming her dad, then got into a shouting match with his new wife. Then when it was Dad's turn, he slammed the mom in his speech, which led to the mom storming up to the stage. Dad's new wife chased her. A fight ensued. The bride ran off in tears, followed by the groom and maid of honor. It was so nice. The MC for the wedding came back to the mic and goes, "I got nothing. Just visit amongst yourselves." This isn't exactly something we did, but my entire wedding day was cringeworthy. Summary: I got scammed out of my wedding outfits. Everyone else had ths. My groom and I are big geeks. We met on a geeky environment and we both aspire to be indie animators. It is a sizable aspect of our job aspirations in life. So we decided to marry in couples cosplay and around the dates of the biggest convention of my country, in South America. Our social circle is majorly geeky, cause I have Asperger's and he's quite asocial. So we didn't care to be surrounded by a bunch of extended family randos at the wedding. Just my mom and sibling, both also Asperger's, and our close friends. He didn't even believe his parents would fit the event. Condates aligned perfectly to have our friends and my mom intersect all at the wedding date. I had a cosplayer friend around the time who is very talented, and I negotiated with her to have her be the maker of both outfits. I paid what price she told me over the span of a few months. Last payment down 1.5 months before the wedding date. 2 weeks before, she sent me a weepy voice message crying on how she would not have 2 props done in time. I said I could overlook that and get them later. After all, they were just 2 props and I cared more for my friend's presence in my special day than whether the outfits were 100% on point. I should have been less out of point anyway. First con day arrived. I was pretty excited. We were told the boxes with both outfits and nearly all props were on the way and would be here by tomorrow, wedding day. All I had received thus far was my wedding dress. Both characters are sorcerer types, so I was missing a witch's hat and staff, and he was missing his entire magician's robes, staff and wizard hat. I was willing to give a wait time for the boxes to arrive, since that can happen. Night arrived, nothing. Next morning arrived, nothing. My wedding was at 11 AM. I was at the hotel room of pretty much who was my bridesmaid and is my best friend. 10:30 AM. All of us ringing the cosplayer's number desperately with no reply. 10:45 AM. It was obvious there wasn't gonna be any wedding outfits. My bridesmaid was already in full cosplay by the point we took a cab to the venue. Me sobbing my god am eyes out in full Asperger's meltdown mode. My groom pretty goddamn upset. We got to know, while this was going down, said ex-friend was having a cosplay photoshoot and did not answer her phone or respond otherwise. We knew this cause my bridesmaid's boyfriend walked to the venue, saw this going down, asked and got no response. We arrived at the venue with all friends already also fully outfitted. My mother was absolutely berserk, called and managed to force the scammer to buy a wig and cheap version of the hat, so I could at least wear it half-assedly at the wedding dinner. Our other closest friend, effectively our best man, had a cosplay of the same character the groom would be, except another version/skin. They were both XL size, so the best man ended up lending us his outfit, so the groom could wear something. He saved our wedding day, pretty much. Everyone looked depressed and angry and stressed in all the photos, even at the wedding dinner, when I had my cheap wig and hat, and we went to sleep early and depressed. The photos of me in pretty much civilian mode except for the dress, while everyone else's was in proper clothing, looked absolutely cringe-worthy, especially with husband's thinly hidden rage in my red from crying eyes. Groom and I ended up confronting the scammer and being miserable the rest of the con, asking for the boxes or their tracking number so I could at least try to wear my overdue wedding outfits in con dates. Her answer was my day was ruined too. Don't worry. She was not getting married at this con, though. She never apologized. I got my witch's hat and a refund of my husband's stuff a month after the wedding date. I got to learn later on she and the fiance she had at the time broke up 2 months after my wedding. She said he was the love of his life. I try to look back at it and laugh. It motivated me to do husband's cosplay and my own props without help, which so far has been fun and therapeutic. I broke off all relations with the friend and got her blocked from everywhere. Apparently she has a steadily bad reputation with the local cosplay community. I will debut the outfits next year, since all cons are cancelled due to Rona. Husband and I are happy together. The end. I supervised and bartended for an events company for years, so I have seen way too many weddings. One of the cringiest things I have ever seen was at a high-end wedding we did for a Jewish couple. It was a kosher event, and I was supervising the event through the catering company. We were strictly instructed by the father/mother of the bride who were paying for the event, and in actuality the client, that all the leftover food for religious purposes was to be thrown out after the meal was done on advisement from the matriarch. Later on in the night, when the bride/groom found out we threw it out, they started absolutely berating me and a couple other staff in front of a ton of guests and family hanging around to party. It went on for so long and was so awkward with way too many people just staring with kind of shocked looks. Eventually the bride's mother/father came over and started yelling at the bride/groom for not following, understanding the advice of the matriarch and representing their family poorly, and it turned into quite the whole dramatic public argument. Guests all just started slowly leaving and the whole party were down pretty quick. We just kind of backed out of the situation slowly to clean up. I can only imagine the damper that put on the wedding night and the awkwardness of the whole situation with the family the next day. Used to work as a bartender for weddings on an island. Beautiful location, and it paid really well. To reserve the venue alone cost upwards of $30,000. This particular wedding was between a police officer and a prosecutor. The bride and groom made it clear that they didn't want to do the whole cake smashing into the face thing, but at the last second, in a stunning twist of betrayal, the bride smashed the cake into the groom's face. Everyone laughed. It was kind of funny. He was a bear of a guy, and she was this tiny woman, so it was kind of comical to see this burly man with cake on his face. What happened next wasn't funny. He tried to jam the cake in her face, but she was too quick and turned and dodged it. Cake in hand, he then proceeds to grab her hair and jerk it, as if he was pissed that she had gotten away with it. Almost everyone switches from laughing to, "Oh fuck, oh shit," instantly. The groom looked, he was seeing red. The groomsmen, of course, are laughing their ass off and smacking him on the back, while her bridesmaids whisk her away to the bathroom. She was obviously crying and upset. She came out about 20 minutes later. I saw a lot of interesting situations while working on that island, but I often think back on this one. From day one it didn't look like a healthy relationship, and I really hope the bride is doing okay. Really stuck with me. I went to a wedding where food served was a breakfast buffet. The couple loves brunch apparently, since it came up like 8 times in various speeches and vows. The order of the buffet was couple trivia based, so my table of hometown friends of the bride, who I didn't know very well, she went to high school with my boyfriend, had to wait almost an hour after the buffet started to get our food. Our table didn't get any trivia questions, right, so we were served last and all the breakfast was cold, and there was no bacon or sausage left. So we had cold eggs and stale, dry waffles as the wedding dinner also. It was in a barn. I don't know if you've ever eaten cold scrambled eggs that have been sitting open in a barn before, but I don't recommend it. And the bride convinced my boyfriend and his friend to do their wedding video as a gift. They're legit video people who get paid lots of money to do that sort of thing usually. I don't know how they, bride/groom, guilted them to do the entire wedding video for free, but it was thousands of dollars worth of work. And my boyfriend and his friend/business partner who were attending the wedding and working the whole time didn't even get free drinks. Cash bar all night. The couple openly said a year later that they probably rushed into the wedding too soon. They were probably 22 at the time. They haven't lived together in like 5 years, but I genuinely don't know if they are still together or not. Ugh. I'm still annoyed about it. Every time we go to a wedding we reference this one as the baseline of awful. At my half-sister's wedding, the bride and groom danced to Barbie Girl as their first dance song. He wasn't dancing so much as puffing up his chest and kinda swagger walking / skipping around the dance floor though. It was brutal to watch, but to be fair the whole event was pretty cringe. Some of the other things I had to experience were the groom calling his mother the most beautiful woman there in front of his new bride. On 2 occasions the groom's mother ran across the room and jumped on the groom, him wrapping his arms around her and her wrapping her legs around his crotch region like she was in her early 50s at the time and wearing a very low cut dress. They also did a bit of grinding during some of the dancing. We saw everything, and no, she hadn't been drinking. The groom's sister wore a very skin tight bright yellow dress. It looked like it took 3 people to get her into the thing and you could see everything. It was also pretty low cut so she looked kinda like Meredith from The Office on Causal Day. But if the dress was yellow and skin tight, one of the groom's friends got so drunk he almost fought my dad over his suit jacket, claiming it was his. It wasn't, there were 2 different colors, and he was wearing his jacket. At a friend's wedding, a friend of the bride and groom set up this awkward cringy proposal for his girlfriend. The bride told everyone, but the one girl, who came out to catch her bouquet, to not go for it. She acted like she was going to throw it, then turned and kinda passed it to someone who carried it like it was flying through the air to the girl's hands. Then the guy came up to her and said, "We have an emergency." She looked confused and asked what it was. He awkwardly got down on one knee and responded with, "I just can't spend another moment of my life without," and he took out some sort of placeholder ring. The girl was very clearly embarrassed and uncomfortable but kinda nodded, accepted the ring and let him kiss her cheek before the reception resumed. The Mormon wedding point. My friend got married at 19 to his first ever girlfriend. His family absolutely hated her. She had no personality, weighed about 400 pounds. She had no social skills, and basically she was an asshole. There was zero chemistry between the couple, so everyone knew it was going to be a total disaster. I somehow got roped into taking some of the photos, so I had to go to the temple for the pre-wedding pictures. My friend looked great in his rented tuxedo. He seemed to be all in, and I wanted to be supportive, so I kept my mouth shut. When the bride showed up I nearly died at the sight of her. Her hair looked unbrushed, unwashed, and greasy with her veil haphazardly put on and wrinkled. She had on no makeup either, which didn't help the fact she bared an unfortunate face. Her dress was cut in a way to really accentuate her enormous gut, and the dress was too short for her, which was great because it allowed for everyone to appreciate the brown Birkenstocks she was wearing with socks. I thought she was going to change into her wedding shoes. People, they were the wedding shoes. So I'm taking the photos and the bride never smiled once, nor did the groom's parents, who I swear could only scowl point. So I have to go to a waiting room while they're getting married. Mormon weddings are for members only, and afterwards we head to the reception. Some members of the church were there, but you could tell the groom's parents wanted to keep this on the down low. The food was all potluck and there wasn't much of it because there were maybe 20 guests or so. The groom has me queue up a song on his CD player. I was also the DJ, and asks the bride to dance. She huffs, rolls her eyes, and reluctantly starts swaying with him on the dance floor. The crowd is unmoved watching this odd couple. The bride in Birkenstocks, who's a good foot taller than the groom is and 300 pounds heavier than he is. Nobody is watching, and the groom's mother is gathered with friends doing social damage control point as the space emptied and everyone went home. As I'm cleaning up with the groom's mother I say, "Well, congratulations," and she looks at me, rolls her eyes, and goes, "Yeah, right." They stayed married for 2 years and finally, thankfully, divorced. I've got 2. My grandfather has been married 5 times. At this point, each one of his marriages and relationships are just disasters. It's the typical very wealthy much older man and much younger woman scenario. His 5th marriage was disguised as a summer business / family / friend summer party. Well, we were all fooled. Surprise wedding. This woman was my dad's age, and my dad is the youngest of all of his siblings. My aunts were sobbing. Nobody could say anything. It was just all around awkward as all hell. Needless to say, the marriage did not last. A lot of fighting and her personality went from disgustingly sweet to an absolute nightmare the second it was made legal. Side note, I obviously can't prove anything here, but I have a really gross feeling she was tampering with his food, and he was in and out of the hospital a lot during their marriage and it magically stopped when she moved out. Again, can't prove anything, but I have an icky feeling based off of things I saw. Second one, when my husband and I were dating we went to a wedding for a friend of his. I'm not here to cheat on how anyone wants to live their lives. You do you. But they dated for about 5 years before getting married, and apparently they are very religious. I did not really know this prior to attending their wedding. My husband shared with me pre-wedding that in their entire 5 years they have only kissed once, because the bride wanted to save a second kiss for her wedding day. So aside from that they have only held hands. That first kiss at the altar was everything you'd expect someone's second kiss in their entire life would be. So I was a +1 to a groomsman at a wedding where the ceremony alone was 3 hours long, no exaggeration. The couple were strong Christians. Bride didn't have a relationship with her father. So, a few days before the wedding she asked a man from her church to dress up as Jesus, to walk her down the aisle and give her away. No explanation of this anywhere. People didn't know whether it was her dad or someone in a white gown with a red cloth in a cheap Halloween costume walking her down. It was confusing. Then there was an hour of worship songs before the ceremony even started. Bride sang a song, and another 2 of the bridesmaids as well. She wrote her own vows, which she read from 700 pages at the end. The bride read a 12-page story she wrote about an epiphany she had about not liking her wedding dress at first but then realized it was a metaphor for her life about change. It was all confusing. She had only lived in this town for 2 months before marrying the groom, so most from her church didn't really know her all that well. The couple also had the groom's roommate move out the same week as the wedding, so their home was not packed or settled. It was not well thought out at all. Somehow, 2 days before the wedding, there was no confirmed plan for the bouquet for the bride nor the 7 bridesmaids nor the boutonnieres for the 7 groomsmen and parents of the bride. So me and another person invited to the wedding, but not involved, put together silk flower arrangements. New York wedding photographer here. Worked a fairly big studio, so I had access to the biggest and best venues and vendors of New York City. This couple's budget blew everything out of the water. February wedding. Florist had actual trees installed to be the centerpieces for the tables. Actual faking trees. Knowing they spent serious coin, and that this really was extravagant, me and my team covered the sheet out of that wedding. Decor, food, music, everything was covered. Florist then showed the photo and video team the PSD resistance, out of season monarch butterflies, to be released as they kissed. Blown away, the 6 people on the photo and video team had a meeting. We quickly brought up how small these butterflies would appear in our photos and video with such a large venue. Wedding was great. We worked hours off. Venue and vendors loved everything we shot. Then when it came time to build the album and discuss prints with the couple, they complained and eventually ghosted the studio over our coverage of one tiny aspect of their day. Turns out I had a friend who knew someone who knew the couple. They spent over $2 million on this New York wedding and had no money for a finished video and albums. Their marriage lasted 2 years. My cousin had his dad as his best man. His mother wore a white wedding-ish looking dress and she walked his beagle down the aisle. The beagle was wearing a doggy wedding dress, and as soon as it saw my cousin it ran down the aisle and sat down right in front of him. So for a good 2-3 minutes it looked like my cousin was about to marry his dog. The bride and groom also arranged that 2 small candles light one big candle bit. But the wedding was in an open field and the wind kept blowing the candles. Also, they forgot to put a lighter at the altar, so they had to ask the crowd for a light, and my dad, a lifelong smoker, ran up and gave them his. Still didn't stop the wind though. They bailed halfway through the speech. Also the wedding was cowboy themed. He has never worked on a farm and she grew up in the burbs in the next town over, so no one really understood why. The pews were bales of hay with mismatched random blankets and bedding draped over them to help prevent the itchiness that follows sitting on hay. Didn't help. There's so much more about this wedding that was cringe-worthy. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy my cousin found someone, and I wish them both the best. But, I feel like the whole wedding cold waited until after my cousin got off welfare, when they'd have an actual budget for it. The whole thing was memorable. This whole wedding day was a hot mess. First, the bride had my sister-in-law dye her hair the morning of the wedding. She leaves the house to go to get her hair done after it's dyed. We later find out she didn't show up. Everyone calls her. When she finally answers 2 to 3 hours later, she says she just needed to go for a drive. So now we are nearing wedding time. My father-in-law calls us telling us to get there now and not be late, and we are rushing out the house, and in comes the bride. Not dressed, hair and makeup not done, followed by some of her family members not dressed yelling at us for turning off the irons when they needed them like we knew. My sister-in-laws stay behind to help the bride get ready. She flips out on them telling them to fuck off. They head to the park where the wedding is to take place. Mind you, this is Texas in summer with a storm rolling in, so it's humid AF. She finally shows up 45 minutes later, then refuses to get out of the car until she had her pearls. Her brother goes to get them. Then she won't get out of the car until her parents show up another 45 minutes later and surprise her aunt dressed for the wedding, because they show up and immediately ask if it's over and can go to the reception. So this wedding finally happens almost 2 hours late, and during the reception the sky unleashes a torrential downpour that slaps several tornado watches through the night. The saying rain on your wedding day is bad luck was an understatement for that union. They aren't together today. Shortly after graduation, one of my college roommates asked me to be his best man. We weren't particularly close, but we were good enough friends. I accepted, and he told me it was really just for the ceremony. His fiancée told him he would not be having a bachelor party. Fresh out of school, I was barely employed, and he was living on the other side of the state. Renting a tux and the road trip there were going to put a dent in my finances, but I figured, what the hell, I can do a month on ramen and bike to work if I can't afford gas for a week. Plus the wedding would be a half-hour drive from my parents' house, so I could combine a visit to them and make a weekend of it. I drove up the night before for the rehearsal in the church. No rehearsal dinner. I ordered a pizza when we got back to his apartment, where I'd be crashing on the couch. The next morning, we were up early and went to the church hall where the reception was going to be and decorated it. Finally, showtime. As the groomsmen were getting ready, the groom proudly showed that he bought a 6-pack of grey dress socks at Walmart, the same color as the grey tuxedos, so we'd all match. The ceremony goes off quickly without a hitch. Just the vows, maybe 15 minutes. We exit the church and are herded into the lobby area that connect the church to the hall to do the reception line. Then the photographer herds all of us back into the church for the photos, which took quite a while. First all the guys, then all the girls, then the groom and the guys, then the bride and the girls, then the bride and the groomsmen, blah blah blah. All told, probably 45 minutes of every combination you can think of. Finally, we were done. Time to celebrate. We head back out to the reception hall to see them cleaning up. Everyone was gone. The bride and groom had snuck out of the photos, cut the cake, it was served, and with the wedding party missing in action, every single guest had left. No band, no food, no drinks, no cake for you. I felt like an idiot because I had gotten them in great champagne flutes that they would not be using. I got to my parents' house very early on that Saturday afternoon, starving and broke. But hey, I got a nice pair of grey dress socks out of it. That was the last time I ever spoke to him. This one's a long one. My sister's wedding. Boy was it bad. From the church to the venue, it wasn't fun. First, my sister arrived to the church on time. But because there was another wedding going on, and the bride for that wedding wanted to be fashionably late, it pushed my sister's wedding back an hour and a half. My sister, to say the least, was pissed. Every right to be. As the ring bearer walked down the aisle, the rings fell from the pillow he was holding. He was only 3 and obviously doesn't realize he is holding rings on a pillow. I had even told my sister to have the best man hold them, but she insisted that it was fine. The person playing the trumpet is the caught walking and also messed up a few notes, so that was pretty bad too. During the ceremony, the groom's brother would clap after every song sung in the church. They weren't religious, so to them, it was a joke. Fast forward to the venue. We all arrive early to take pictures. The venue tells her that because another wedding is taking place there as well, she had limited space to take photos. My sis was fuming. The photographers didn't help either. They were newbies that my C's met through a friend. They didn't take command and tell people where to go or what to do. So everyone was everywhere getting wasted, especially the groom's side of the family. We finally get inside for the reception and the music sucks. This DJ didn't wear a suit and tie, but instead wore a black shirt, black jeans, and a black beanie to this formal wedding. The music didn't travel well. He was set up in the back of the room, and the new Liwats and guests were more towards the front of the room, so we could barely hear any music. The entrances were cringy because we couldn't hear the music well. For the first dances, the groom and his mom didn't do a slow dance, which was fine, but instead, she kept flinging herself around while he was just trying to dance with her in place. The music only got worse. The music would stop in between songs, not transition. Sometimes we'd be in silence for 5 minutes, sometimes 3. The mix barely worked. You couldn't hear the speeches well. And the groom's uncle and little cousin decided to sing them a song, which no one heard, and my sister was not happy at all. The day was already going bad and this made it worse. Not to mention they really weren't good, but she knew they tried, so she was happy about that. The DJ kept changing the good songs constantly, or played the good songs while we were all eating, or about to leave for the night. Oh, not to mention my mom almost fought the groom's brother's girlfriend. This girl was so drunk that when she would dance, her dress would lift and her panties would show. And my mom yelled at her for it. And it all happened on the dance floor, where everyone saw. My poor sister had a pretty bad wedding. This will get buried, but that's probably for the best point. So my wife's cousin was getting married to a guy that cheated on his previous wife with her. They had to wait for the divorce to be finalized, so that delayed everything a few months. When they finally decide to get the wedding planned and everything, he asks me to be his best man. I didn't even know his last name at the time. They don't have a lot of friends, and my wife didn't want any bad emotions with her cousin, so I agreed. The actual wedding planning itself was pretty abysmal, but the ceremony itself was okay I guess. Nothing fancy, but there wasn't much in terms of rehearsal. So after the ceremony, the bride and groom get to their car and fuck off to somewhere. No one knows where they went. They didn't answer their phones either, so great. We all head over to the reception hall to just wait for them. As the reception is in like an hour or so point we get to the hall, and there is no booze, only some store brand soda. The hall allows it, and has cups for kegs and all, but they didn't pay for that package, and they didn't bring any in, with the exception of a bottle of champagne for them, and the wedding party. Since they didn't pay the alcohol allowed fee for the temporary liquor license, or whatever, they couldn't open it. So the toast was done with store brand soda. Also the couple was upset that no one met them at the bar. They didn't realize that they never told anyone that was the plan. Kind of helps to know those things now. The food. Oh, the food. They had the food catered by this mother and son catering service that specializes in southern BBQ and soul food. I love BBQ and soul food. I have spent way too much money on smokers and grills because of the love for good BBQ. So the caterers get there a little late, but no big deal. It happens. A bunch of us help out to get the food set up buffet style, and we are excited. There are ribs, greens, mac and cheese, grilled chicken, baked beans. Oh yeah. Now almost time to eat. They ask me to lead a prayer. No warning. Just here. Lead a prayer. I'm an atheist, but fine. I'll suck it up and just do the prayer. I'm not going to cause any drama. Now it's time to get our food. The moment I've been waiting for. This is hands down the biggest culinary disappointment of my entire life. Gordon Ramsay would have broken down and cried. Guy Fieri would have driven his Camaro off a bridge. Alton Brown would have sworn off food for the rest of his beatharian life. Dry, flavorless ribs with really mediocre sauce. Bland greens, dry burnt chicken, baked beans that were more brown sugar than anything else, and mac and cheese, which was literally macaroni noodles with shredded cheddar mixed in. I was thankful for the store-bought dinner rolls and half-frozen butter pockets that meal. I couldn't wait for this thing to get over, so we could run to get real food. The music was awful too, because of course it was. They didn't get a DJ, instead they put a playlist on their iPod, and used that over the PA system. No organization either, just a jumble of songs. I get that DJs can be expensive, but this was no excuse, as the bride's uncle is a DJ and will DJ relatives' weddings for free as their wedding gift. I know this because he was the DJ at our wedding and I heard him offer this at a holiday get together months earlier. Also their first dance was to a country breakup song. I don't know the name, but it was awful. Point this'll didn't keep people around for long. After the first dance people were starting to leave at an increasing rate. At first the couple didn't notice, which was good. They're both pretty sensitive people. Around 5 minutes after the dance, an elderly uncle trips on a rug and hits his head on the floor. People take him to the hospital as a precaution, had clotting issues, in addition to being old. After this, the couple finally noticed that half of the guest had left. They finally cut the cake and sent some home with the remaining guest. No one wanted to take any of the food. At least the cake was decent. A few of us noticed that they seemed distraught, that people were leaving pretty quick, and we told them that they were all just worried about the uncle who fell and is now at the hospital. He was fine, ended up living several more relatively healthy years, and thankfully they bought it. The wedding party, minus the one wasted bridesmaid who kept going to her car to drink, and some family quickly cleaned everything up, and we got the F out of there. The Taco Bell that we picked up on the way home tasted like manna from heaven after that day. We got home at 7 p.m. The reception started at 5. That was the quickest I've ever been home after a wedding. What an absolute disaster. Wife and I were invited to a wedding of a coworker of hers at a winery. Sounds great, right? So we get to the winery, and I'll add not to the winery itself, but to a meadow of dead grass 1/4 mile away, and it was right off the highway. Cars whizzing by at 55, just steps away. So, after we parked in a gravel area and sat in some cheap foldable chairs that sank into the ground when you sat on them, some arriving guests in a lifted 4x4 truck, 2 in front and 4 in back, decide they are taking an alternative way into the field. They drove through the ditch, getting the truck stuck, then finally got it freed, and did some cookies in the grass, and the tires kicked up bits of dead grass which blew in the wind all over the wedding area, all while this activity was encouraged with party howls despite being at a winery. They had no wine. They did have a keg, but it was the cheapest beer you could get, and this is the kind of beer that somehow doesn't taste better after 5 to 6 of them. As the groom was walking up the aisle, the groomsmen were giving him a hard time, calling him a gimp as he had a cast on his leg and was limping along with crutches, and this didn't let up. Now, I do concede it's pretty normal for guys' friends to roast him, but during his vows, he could barely get in 2 words when one yelled, "She has a kid," twice, probably because nobody laughed the first time. Another reminded the groom that the bride has a 4x4 truck and he better watch out for it. So that was when it was explained to me how he got the cast. They got into a big fight a week earlier and she ran him over with her truck. The DA was pursuing charges of domestic violence against her while he was pleading to get charges dropped. They didn't smear cake in each other's faces. Nope, they smeared it all over each other, on clothes, in hair, down behind his tux. There was no dinner, only hors d'oeuvres, which was shelled peanuts and chocolate covered bacon, and the chocolate was completely melted from the heat of the day. Not long after, as the reception was getting really rowdy, my wife and I split and found a restaurant nearby to get dinner and drinks, and several other couples from the wedding followed along, and we talked about what on earth we just experienced. I don't know what happened later, but I'm guessing cops were involved, or possibly even farm animals. Not exactly the bride and groom themselves, but about 12 years ago, my friends had a wedding at a church that was a non-traditional religion. I have no idea what it was called, but it wasn't any type of Christian or Eastern religion. It was some new age spiritual / non-religion thing. They never used a word like God. Anyway, the entire service was primarily just this lady trying to say poetic things about love and coupling, which would have been fine, but she had this obsession with the concept of circles. And she just kept going on and on and on about circles. This is circle. That's a circle. Everything is a circle. I mean, it was every sentence 200 sentences about circles. Kinda impressive in a way. It got to the point where a couple of us in the audience really couldn't keep ourselves from giggling. I felt really bad, but my god, every time she said circle she would make this giant motion with her arms, to illustrate just how circular a circle was. Honestly completely ruined the mood, made it feel like a giant improv comedy sketch, or maybe one of those bizarre new age spoken word poetry readings. It was like being married by the dudes from Ancient Aliens point, and it went on for like an hour. No joke, it was the most cringe thing ever, and I could tell even my friend, the bride, by the end she had this look on her face like we shoulda just gone to a regular church to this day. The simply uttering of the word circle in any conversation, no matter how serious the conversation, still makes me smile and quietly giggle to myself. Groom's dad count. Groom's dad, my uncle, was not happy when my cousin moved out to live with his new girlfriend. He was upset when they got engaged, cause this tramp was stealing his son away from him. Wedding date is coming up, and he decides to air his grievances on Facebook, calling my cousin's fiance some pretty nasty names. Fiance fires back with some zingers of her own. Up until this point she'd held her tongue, but no more, and uninvited my uncle from the wedding. I guess that was some convincing that happened, and he was eventually re-invited on the condition that he behaves wedding day. They have the ceremony at the community church and uncle manages to hold his tongue, even though he's visibly upset. Reception comes along. It's set up like a big potluck, where everyone brings something, all set out on foldable picnic tables, and outside in the church grounds. Bride and groom stand up and have an announcement. While looking directly at my uncle, my cousin's new wife announces they are 4 months pregnant. My uncle loses his faking sheet, starts screaming his choice words about his new daughter-in-law, gets up and starts literally flipping the picnic tables before he is physically removed from the venue. Then it starts to rain. I think at that point a lot of people said congrats and left, and some stayed and ate inside the church. Overall not a spectacular day for anyone involved. Little late to the party, but I think I've got a good one. The whole day was super tedious. The ceremony was on a Sunday and was a full 2 hours. The bride and groom met at a Christian college and were very religious. Jesus was mentioned at least 50 times during the ceremony. After that we drove about 40 minutes to a really nice venue and had decent appetizers. That's when we found out the reception was dry. Not just that, it wasn't an open bar. You couldn't go into the other side of the venue and buy a drink and bring it back. You always can at this venue if you don't like what's at the open bar. As far as we know there weren't any recovering alcoholics in the wedding party or family. It was just that they didn't want alcohol getting between anyone. And Jesus, great segue into the speeches. There were 10 people in each party with 2 maids of honor, a matron of honor, and 2 best men mans. All of them gave speeches. All of them brought up Jesus. So did the priest, who also gave a speech, as if he didn't get the point across during the ceremony. Then all the parents gave speeches. More Jesus. Finally the food came out. I've always described it as school lunch Salisbury steak, because it was indistinguishable from school lunch Salisbury steak. Right down to the indigestion point. Cue the dancing and the cringiest part. The father and daughter did their dance to a version of Butterfly Kisses that they had pre-recorded themselves. Note, they are not good singers. They also danced nose to nose as the song would suggest. All of this I would have enjoyed if I had even a single beer in me, but stone sober I just went dead inside. There's more, but those are the highlights. Picture a sweet, sincere, active widow finding love again after many years on her own. Her wedding at age 70 is much talked about and well attended. The groom is her age and equally loved in their large evangelical church. They have a highly original and lengthy wedding ceremony in which each of them sings several songs to backing tapes, a common practice in their church, which I do not attend. The ceremony has 2 charismatic ministers, the one from the groom's church at his second home tag teams with the second, dynamic sometime pastor who has officiated many weddings at similar churches in the area. The second minister is the bride's adult son. Each of the ministers has readings, banter, and vows that they have written in collaboration with the bride and groom. They clearly spent a lot of time on them, and mostly they sounded like pretty standard fare for this kind of church. The younger minister, at one point, was listing all the roles that Christ had given the husband in relation to his wife. The husband was the head of the home, the guardian, the warrior, the rock, the initiator of the act of love. Brief pause. Then more about the wife, being the helpmeet and the giving soul and the heart and such, the initiator of the act of love. That part is a direct quote. Now I know people in some churches have strong feelings about the role of the husband when it comes to the sexual practices of the Christian couple. There are debates about whether a wife has any say at all in what it is that the husband wants and when and how he wants it. There are people who have very deeply held beliefs about what the Bible has to say on this matter. But was this really the time to allude to all of that during the actual vows of your elderly mom's wedding? This was actually my mom's wedding. The minister is my brother. I have never discussed that line with anyone but my husband, who was not raised in this type of church, so the whole thing had been so alien to him that that particular line had not even registered. I know I heard it, but there is no member of my family I could imagine discussing it with. The wedding was 5 years ago, and they seem to still be very happy together.